All right. But he's turning them on. Turn them on now. Are we recording? Yes. Hello. 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 We can't hear him through here. Can you hear me? A little dramatic.
Are you ready? Okay. I'd like to bring the Rio Vista General Plan Working Group to order. Today's date is November 3rd, 2022. Can we have roll call, please?
Chairman Walt Stanish,
Here.
Vice Chair Lisa Hetchman. Here. Edwin Okamura,
Here.
Tom Donnelly, absent. Emmett Holtzlander,
Here.
Judith Adamson. Arthur Darden,
Here.
Mary Ellen Lamoth, absent. Rick Dolk,
Here.
Lisa Duke. Here.
Can you join the vice chair with the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Okay, public comment. If anybody have any public comment on anything not on the agenda tonight, they're welcome to come up. And nobody in the audience, anybody online?
Nothing online.
Okay, so we'll close public comment. If there are any questions about the last minutes from October 20th, anybody have any questions about it? Any corrections? Okay, so do we have a motion to approve the minutes from? Okay, Art,
I'll second.
Edwin,
Chairman Walt Stanish,
here, present, yes. Yeah, everybody's awake, thank you.
Vice Chair Lisa Hetchman,
Yes.
Edwin Okamura,
Yes.
Emmett Holtzlander,
Yes.
Judith Adamson. Arthur Darden.
We're going to go on to 0.41, discussion.
Chair, members of the working group, here we are again. This is the 10th meeting of the general plan working group. So we're actually a fairly significant meeting this evening. Brent, could you pull up the presentation? And there's a, right near the slider on the bottom, on the right. Oh, it keeps.
Middle to the left. No.
One over from there to the left. There it is. There we go. We're good. Thank you. Pretty significant meeting in that we're going to be verifying some important information we've heard from the working group, getting more input, and then really at this point, we're as the staff team, we're getting ready to begin producing the elements. So tonight is an important check-in, and we're going to be going over the vision statement. Nick will walk us through the vision statement, guiding principles. We both will discuss the potential land uses. So we went to all the opportunity sites, and we had certain direction from the working group that we want to verify and talk about the land use designations as we see them laying out and get your input. Then we'll be going over some very preliminary work on population and employment projections, because we wanted to start testing what does it look like to build out as Rio Vista? What do we have enough land area? How is that lining up? And then we want to talk this evening about the next community workshop that we're anticipating somewhere in the middle of January, which we're very much hoping to get a lot of community members, and we're going to work through every channel we can to hopefully get a good turnout at the workshops in January. But we want to talk about where they'll be held and the format. So that's what we're going over this evening. Nick is going to walk us through the guiding principles, and I will say that we've been refining these, and we think that they really reflect what we've heard from the working group and from the committee. So we're interested in your input. These are never done until the gavel lands on the general plan. They can be refined, but the purpose of the guiding principles, the vision statement guiding principles, is these are the things we have to achieve in Rio Vista. So if there's anything that somehow has been left off of the list, that's just we've got to do this, we've got to achieve this. We want to know that, because we're really figuring out where the greatest emphasis of the plan will be. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick Pergakis, and he's going to join us over Zoom and walk us through the vision statement and guiding principles.
Thanks, Paul. Are you showing the PowerPoint screen right now?
Yes, it is up on the screen. Are you not seeing it?
No.
So it,
Not.
okay. So we're on the vision statement and guiding principle slide, the opening slide, and just if you progress along with me, we'll stay in sync.
Okay, that sounds good. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having us this evening. And I'll again walk through the draft vision statement and guiding principles. I did send out an email yesterday morning providing a copy of this vision statement and guiding principles for you to review and provide your feedback. We had sent out a version the week before. That was the version you had, I think, seen back in July when we had first met and described the vision statement and guiding principles, with some revisions we had received by email from a few general plan working group members. But I'll go over where we are today and some of the items that we'd like to present. So again, the draft vision statement helps identify key values and aspirations for the future of the city. It describes an ideal future for the community to work towards and where you want to be in the next 20 years. And these guiding principles will help
Apologies, Nick. Okay,
You all good?
okay. Hold on, Nick. The show is kind of jumping around a little bit, Nick. Just a minute. We're trying to
Okay.
get it set up. Nick, are you now seeing the presentation?
Yes, I am now seeing it.
Fabulous. Just let me know when you'd like to progress.
Okay, thank you. So as I was saying, the guiding principles help guide the creation of the goals that we will set in the general plan and the policies and implementation strategies and measures to help achieve the vision that we describe in the vision statement. And these principles will expand on the main ideas and concepts contained in the vision statement. And these important concepts can be given more weight when we do describe it here in the guiding principles. Next slide. So this is the vision statement we had gone over in July of 2022, back a few months ago. I'm just showing, generally how, I'm not going to read it word for word, but this is what we had back then. But if you go to the next slide, Paul, just shows that we've condensed it quite a bit based on the feedback we've received from some of the general plan working group members. And this seems more succinct, and it seems to get more to the point of what we've been talking about over the last several months. So I think I'll go ahead and read it because I think it's important to probably read through. And if you have any comments tonight, be happy to hear your thoughts. And you can always, again, give us some comments as well by email or call us, and we'll discuss it in more detail. So the revised draft vision statement is, in 2045, Rio Vista will be a thriving waterfront community with small town charm and a strong sense of community. We will be a diverse, inclusive, and safe place to live, work, and play for all generations. Rio Vista supports and values local businesses, arts, and community events, welcoming visitors from around the region. We will be stewards of the environment and honor our agricultural and cultural heritage in the Sacramento River Delta region. We will remain true to these values to maintain a high quality of life, economic prosperity, and opportunities for our residents. So if anybody read through this yesterday and had some thoughts that they want to share, I'd be happy to hear those tonight.
I had one, Nick. For me, I had to keep going back in line 4 where it says local businesses, arts, and community events. I had to read that several times. I didn't know if just inserting the arts would be helpful. But I also didn't want to step on anybody else's toes if there had been discussion around just the flow of that wording. But I had to read it several times, also just to make sure that grammatically it was making sense to me. So
Yeah,
I don't think that there's any ownership around the specific wording. So if anything like that is just not feeling right, that's great input. So
Yeah, I think that was good.
we'll work on that.
yeah, I think that makes sense to have the arts.
for me, that's what I caught, because the semicolon
Yeah, I
made
think that-
sense only if it was the arts instead of arts and community events. And so that's why I had to read it several times.
Yeah, good.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Go ahead.
Okay, we'll go ahead. Next slide. So here are the guiding principles that we've established to help expand upon the vision statement. And these are very similar to what we had before. We had taken out one of them. And that one was regarding, I believe it was preserving like kind of focusing on preserving agricultural space, open space. But we feel like that's, kind of reflected in fostering a sustainable community and kind of get at it in these other guiding principles. So, but we'll start with revitalize downtown in the waterfront district. So we have a few bullets for that where we're saying promote a downtown that is vibrant destination with unique retail, entertainment, arts, and dining options. Support and attract businesses in the downtown. Provide the infrastructure needed to support growth in the downtown waterfront. promote, incentivize, and foster the expansion of retail, commercial, and housing uses in the downtown waterfront area, and preserve the historic character of downtown while supporting new development. I think we'll go ahead and just go slide by slide. And if you have any comments or feedback on these bullets underneath revitalize downtown.
I have a
So,
comment.
yeah, just give me the high sign and I'll make sure we
Okay.
take a pause.
I like this, by the way. The first bullet, it says promote a downtown that is vibrant, a vibrant destination, blah, blah. I just think we should probably add something to the effect of with sufficient short-term lodging or something to that effect. Because a lot of this is dependent on a hotel.
Sure. Good point.
Any other comments on, yes,
The third item, it says, provide the infrastructure needed to support growth in the downtown waterfront area. What infrastructure are you talking about? Are you talking about a wall for the floodplain? I mean, we have water, sewer, street and, and gutter there. What other infrastructure? Why was that?
we're
worded
not
that
sure
way?
we have water and sewer capacity to support intensifying of uses. We've talked about maybe multi-story development.
But we
and,
already have buildings on the waterfront that use water and sewer.
It's the capacity, the volume.
Okay.
Yes, there are services here, but do we have the capability to serve twice as much use? If we went to a lot of multi-story buildings, a hotel, that type of development that would intensify, would we be able to serve it? So we really want to make sure, and the answer may be yes, we're fine.
Okay.
So to that end, should that be on the downtown waterfront rather than in? My head went to when it's reading as in, literally expanding it geographically, spatially, not just as part of your infrastructure. Where you're talking about capacities.
Well, first of all, the downtown waterfront area is expanding. Because it's expanding on the other side of the bridge. We're gonna be designating almost 100 new acres. So,
I meant out into the river, but that's a fair point.
got it. Okay. Yeah, no, we're not gonna grow over the
Right.
water.
Right.
So does it make more sense? Get me back to the specific word that caught you.
I was just wondering if it should be on growth on the downtown waterfront. But I could also see if you added area, everybody here had verbally said area. So growth
Got it.
in the downtown waterfront area.
Yeah.
And maybe you should just remove downtown after that as well, on the waterfront,
Great point.
right?
Okay, other comments?
Edwin, would you want in the fourth bullet, a similar removal of downtown, or is downtown specific for that particular fostering and incentivization?
Right, I would think we take that out too.
Okay, does
Since we're talking
waterfront,
about
does
expanding
waterfront
all the way
area
out.
capture it, or waterfront? What do you want? Waterfront or waterfront area?
Waterfront.
Waterfront, okay, so we'll just make those references to the waterfront, okay?
And then on your infrastructure, you could do infrastructure capacity. If you add that in there, that kind of clears that.
Okay. Anything else? And we do have the opportunity to revisit these, clean them up, but what's good is I think we're all talking about the same thing. We all have the same vision, and that's what's really essential here. So Nick, I'm going on to the next slide.
Okay, thank you. So the next guiding principle is improve mobility and access for all users. This would include providing a safe and efficient and accessible roadway system that serves the mobility needs of all users. improve the city's circulation network to provide safe travel for pedestrians. Should say bicyclists here, sorry, vehicles and trucks, and efficiently move people and goods without compromising quality of life, safety, and smooth traffic flow for residents and businesses. So any feedback?
I don't know if this is into the weeds, but it just, I think an important point is connecting the north side of town and the south side of town. I don't know if it's necessary to put it here because it's pretty encompassing. I don't know if anyone else has a thought or noticed that. Yeah, okay, that's fine.
Okay, any other comments? All right, we're going to go on to number 3.
Okay, support a variety of housing options. Encourage a mix of housing types to create diverse neighborhoods that meet the needs of all Rio Vista residents. And promote the building, retention, and renovation of quality housing for all incomes, ages, and abilities.
That's a term that's used where to not lose our existing housing stock. And so particularly some forms of housing can be vulnerable to either declining in quality or just being replaced with other uses. Okay, I'm not seeing anything else. Moving on to number 4.
Foster a sustainable community. Plan for public facilities that respond to the community's growing needs and a changing environment. Ensure today's needs are met without jeopardizing the community's ability to meet future needs. And promote high quality, long lasting development that allows residents to meet daily needs such as shopping, employment, and recreation in close proximity to their homes.
I just had a question on this one. Would you provide an example of ensure today's needs are met without jeopardizing the community's ability to meet future needs? I was stuck on an example, what an example would be.
This is not a Rio Vista example, but in another city just yesterday, we were discussing the fact that a large user is coming along and would use essentially all of the available water and wastewater capacity. And they think that's appropriate, but then there's nothing left for anything else in the city.
Right.
So, and it really was probably focusing most on water and wastewater capacity because those are limiting factors to support development.
Thank you. And I guess I'll bring it up right now. It's used a number of times in here. And I just was wondering if it could, seems unnecessary. Promote high quality, long lasting development. You use that a number of times, high quality or good jobs. Isn't that assumed it's going to be high quality? You don't say bad jobs or low quality development. It's assumed it's going to be good quality, is it not?
I think for planners that review projects, the quality of materials and the quality of development is not always equal. And so when we say things like that, we're looking for designs that are going to stand up over time, both aesthetically as well as the quality of building materials.
Okay. It'll come up in the next couple ones as well.
Okay,
Okay, thanks.
ready to move on? Recreational opportunities.
Ensure all residents to have easy access to high quality recreational opportunities such as parks, river frontage, walking paths, and trails. Expand parks and recreational programs to serve both residents and visitors. And provide a variety of sports and activities for Rio Vista residents of all ages, which we've been hearing about in a lot of outreach efforts, the last bullet in particular.
Just wondered if it, in the first bullet, if it could be walking and biking paths and trails, because bicyclists, it would keep it parallel with what number 2 was with pedestrians and bicyclists.
Okay.
And again, maybe this is a developer thing, but high quality recreational opportunities, what's a low quality recreational opportunity?
What if we just get rid of the word high and just put quality?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there you
We
go.
can find another word for that right there to put in describing that.
Thank you.
Very first phrase, ensure all residents have.
Yeah, there's an extra word there. Yep. Okay. Foster economic growth.
Promote a strong local economy by fostering the growth and expansion of a diversified business community in the city. Support businesses that create good jobs for Rio Vista's resident workforce, and make forward-thinking investments that will position Rio Vista to be successful in an evolving economy.
Again, good job versus bad job.
Quality jobs.
Cool. Well, I mean, how do you
Right,
define that?
high quality, good jobs. Okay.
Which-
Long term.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean, we
have
could
to
put-
qualify that.
I
if
think
we're
what
gonna-
we're trying to differentiate there is, we would like to have a range of jobs. We would like to have some professional level jobs. We would, we recognize that the economy is made up of full spectrum of jobs.
But good is defined very differently by different people. You might say
So-
that, or somebody that's digging wells is a bad job, but it's a great job to other people.
How about
And I-
create a range of jobs that meet,
I think your full spectrum was a good,
Yeah,
was a
I think
good
that's-
statement that create jobs like across the spectrum, or jobs reflecting the full spectrum for Rio Vistas.
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay. Sometimes we have high paying jobs in there too, sometimes, but that would be better, I think, to reflect the full spectrum. Okay.
okay. Good catches. And now the final one, promote fiscal strength.
Plan land uses, their intensities and their locations to provide the right balance of revenues and costs to allow the city to deliver the high quality services expected by the community. And
Okay, high
manage,
quality is coming out already.
yeah, manage fiscal resources in a responsible and efficient manner.
That first bullet there is intended to refer to land uses, yes? In both those,
Yes.
their intensities and their locations are the land uses? Is that how I'm supposed to read that?
Land
about-
uses and buildings.
Plan land uses at intensities and in locations.
And so then, okay, could you help me understand what intensity means then?
Oh, intensity is really, if you have an acre of ground, do you have 5,000 square feet of building? Do you have 40,000 square feet of building? Do you, how many stories is it? So intensity just talks about really the amount of usable floor area in some measure.
I thought it was a good combination of intentionality and density. I thought it was a good word. I just.
We're
didn't
not that
understand
smart.
it. Yeah, okay.
No, if you think about some of the industrial uses down near the waterfront, they're very low intensity. They may have a couple of buildings and then 20 acres of yard. So that's an example of very low intensity. Okay. Sorry, Nick, I'm catching up. I'm making edits in the slides behind us, so,
Oh, great.
Okay.
I'm writing it down.
all right. So that gets us through our guiding principles, and those are actually very important because those will be the signposts that we need to achieve these things. We need to take actions, we need to have plans, we need to have strategies to achieve these most important things that matter to the city of Rio Vista and its residents. So appreciate that.
And Paul,
Sir.
Go ahead. No.
I wanted to ask a question for all of us, because I don't know how specific we want to be or what, but just as being a lifer here, at the turn of the century, we had kind of this seismic shift in mentality to where we went from a city that was very happy not growing to a city that really wanted to grow. And we've done a good job, in my opinion, on the outskirts, on the outlying parts of town of developing. We've done a very poor job on the infill side of it for a variety of reasons. But as we talk about here all the time, we're getting to a point where we are landlocked. We're going to be, there's scenarios where in the next 10 to 15 years, we're out of outlying land to develop. So we're going to have this seismic shift again to where we're having to look at more of an infill. Now we indirectly state a lot of that here, but we don't specifically address that our mindset possibly by 2035, 2040 is going to be looking inward. And I don't know, and this is an honest question. I don't know if that's, do we want to spell that out to let citizens know, 10, 15 years from now, that that was on the top of our mind, that we are shifting kind of our mindset to an economic growth, to mobility, to all these more infill ideas, or do we just leave it a little bit more vague like that? Honest question.
Good point.
I think to Rick's point, we look back at the current general plan, question comes, what were they thinking on some of these things? And I think that's exactly what Rick is saying. What were these people thinking
Right.
back when? So I think to be as clear as possible with the way we are thinking would help for the next general plan in 2045.
It's almost if you could add like a given state, like given our current situation or given the past looking at an expansion, knowing that we may have to look at an intensification, since I just learned that word, that might even work in that very first vision statement to say that, hey, there's going to be some flexibility just as a lead in.
The vision statement and guiding principles will be in a preamble of the document. And I think that's a great place to explain what were we thinking. We saw a world that was very open for expansion become very closed. And therefore, a lot of our thought process is going to be, how do we support more development inside the city and live within a smaller footprint than we may have otherwise? So we'll get that explained in the preamble.
Paul, before we move on to this next one, I'd like to open up for public comment and do that each time. So if anybody has any public comment on this and would like to speak, the podium's turned around, but they can come up and speak to the public. Public comment? Okay, thank you.
I have one more comment. Do we have enough about environmental sustainability? One of the previous bullets talks about the city being sustainable, but do we need to spell it out more that in addition, it needs to be environmentally sustainable?
What does environmentally sustainable what comes to mind?
Well, solar, we certainly have wind, expanding solar possibilities.
A water issue for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that something that is a widely held value of the community? Should we be actively thinking about ways that Rio Vista in its own little corner can do something about climate change?
Absolutely. But that's just me. I mean, what do
Well,
other people think?
And
I mean, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct. Well, I mean, as well, we have to think about the sustainability of our community if we want to be selfish. And I think that's okay as well. I mean,
I
that's
don't think so.
sustainability, right?
I don't think we want to be selfish.
Well,
It can be
I'm just
both.
saying if we want to be, but I think sustainability is important. Like you said, water. I
Yeah,
mean, that's
water.
us. We need to be selfish about that.
Okay, and then I think one of the environmental sustainability issues we do have to address is sea level rise. It's going to affect us. The
Mhm.
changing climate, the way water comes down from the mountains, the way it might push up through the delta, that is going to affect Rio Vista.
Is
So-
it purposeful from the city's perspective or a history to not mention educational pursuits or looking at making sure that education can be manifested for itself. Do they leave that to the district? Are there cross purposes there? It just struck me with Rick's statement about that intensification, that we then probably need to be very aware of educational needs. And that doesn't seem to be
Mhm.
mentioned anywhere. I didn't know that is if that has any designations for the two governmental agencies to kind of leave each other alone, or if there should be that consideration of cross purposes.
Well, we're one whole, so I feel it should be. I mean, we talk about Highway 12 and we don't really control 12. It's controlled by Caltrans, so, but it's part of our whole, so we should address all these issues.
Yeah, off the top, it seems to me the education is important enough to be in the vision statement somehow, and that the sustainability would be one of our guiding principles.
It's some of the other items that are within the guiding principles address sustainability. So what we may be talking about is a little bit of a reorganization to pull it together and make it a little bit more clear. And then also I understand we want to get education in there, and whether that's a component of social sustainability or whether that's, I'm not sure exactly where it's going to fit, but we'll reference, because certainly the city has a strong commitment to the quality of the schools.
Sure.
We've heard that. over
Right,
and
and
over.
we talk about in the vision statement about Rio Vista supports and values local businesses, the arts and community events. Seems like that's the place it should be.
Mhm.
I like that spot.
Any additional thoughts? Good. Really helping us to make sure we're catching all that it is to be Rio Vista. All right, and did we have no comments from the public? I'm not sure if anybody's online. Thank you. So now we're going to move on to a discussion of the land use areas. We've been over these. And I will tell you, some of these, we're going to touch on each of them, but some of them may not be very long conversations. We have 14 areas, so we do want to focus on those areas where the working group wants to provide guidance, direction, course corrections. So we're doing a few things when we look at these sites. We're looking for growth areas, growth locations. That's why the vacant land within downtown was identified as an opportunity site because it's vacant, but of course the entire waterfront is in itself an opportunity site. There's some lands that just aren't designated right. We've talked about maybe some industrial lands turn into downtown waterfront, maybe some lands that aren't designated now become industrial. So that's where we're correcting designations within the community. There are some areas that are already in our sphere that we're starting to plan for, that sphere being the area where the local agency formation commission has said, Rio Vista, you can grow into this area. And there's some areas that are completely outside of our sphere that we may want to look at as long-term growth potential. So all of those are opportunities for creating the land uses and the development that will achieve the vision for Rio Vista. I want to just talk a little bit about Flannery. We could take every property owned by Flannery off the map and designate it agriculture. That would be one possible action that might make sense, since we're not sure that Flannery, whoever Flannery is, has any intention of doing anything to develop properties. At this time, staff's recommending we not do that, that we just plan the land as we think is appropriate, put the designations we believe belong there. And if in time the owners of this property are interested, then we can work with them. Otherwise, those lands will sit there with designations. That's what we're recommending. Now, when we start looking at how much growth can happen in Rio Vista, I'll tell you, we're going to dial it back for Flannery because we're looking at a development through 2045. And then within that horizon, we don't think that any of the Flannery lands will be developed based upon the lease agreements or the purchase agreements that they've made. So while you're going to see a big footprint of uses designated for development, we're not anticipating the Flannery lands will actually move forward at this time. That may change.
I ask a question on that though, because even, let's take Flannery out of the Del Rio Hills equation. Even before, I mean, we were at the city council meeting the other night, even before heard of other developers coming into Del Rio Hills saying that's just an impossible. Well, for me, I don't even know why we. So many factors against that, anything ever happening with that.
I have heard the same thing before Flannery bought the Esperson property. I had heard from the city manager that because of the gas leases, because of the existing wells, because of the expense of closing the existing wells, all of that makes that property essentially undevelopable. It's really this group's direction to share with us if you believe that that land should come off of planned uses, then we can talk about that. I think, Robin, you want to share something?
Yeah, on that piece of property, there was a section that was developable. Up by Vineyard Bluffs, there was a section that was developable, but the rest of it has gas lines everywhere. So there is a small section that we could reach out to the city engineer and get that information if you wanted to put that in there.
So we will be coming around to that as a specific piece of property. So let's pick that up as we get to that property, because we'll need your direction, but kind of let that simmer in the back of your mind of, for the Esperson property, should we just be taking it off the map for a host of reasons?
And maybe that should be one of the bullet points for what were they thinking? And this is exactly what we were thinking. So.
We need to catch up on that thought. Okay, so we're now going to just move through these 14 areas. As I mentioned, some of them will involve more discussion than others. And we have provided you 11 by 17 prints of key slides here. So feel free to draw on them, do whatever. I will tell you also that after this meeting, or certainly before we start giving you any elements, we're going to build you binders for each of the working group members. So there'll be dividers for each of the elements and for maps. So you'll have somewhere to keep all of these papers organized as we move forward. So this is the opportunities sites that we previously looked at. And we're essentially going to start down at the Rio Vista. Yes. We're going to start at the Rio Vista Public Waterfront property. You may have known in the past as the Army base. We're not going to be calling it the Army base anymore. I'm not sure that Rio Vista Public Waterfront is going to stick, but we're trying to move forward thinking that it's going to be something other than the Army base. So at least for now, and if anybody has a better, more descriptive name for the property, we're very open to talking about it. We'll start with the Rio Vista Public Waterfront and essentially work counterclockwise around the town back down to Esperson. The waterfront, this is the land, of course, that was conveyed to the city, formerly an Army base, and it has sat there undeveloped for 20 years or more. There are environmental constraints that are holding us back. There's also limits on what uses can be allowed. So within your packet, you have a couple of 8.5 by 11 sheets that are from the conveyance agreement, and these are the uses that are allowed on the public waterfront property. So it's a fairly broad list. There's a lot of opportunities in there. And I don't think that the list is going to be the limiting factor. I think that resolving infrastructure extensions, roadway connections, remedying any contamination on site are going to be the big issues for the waterfront. So this is the property. Of course, the beach treatment plant is just to the below this site and then on to Sandy Beach Regional Park. What we're proposing for this is, first of all, just a designation of I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself. We've summarized the allowed uses from the conveyance document. And, as mentioned, they're pretty broad. Recreational uses, interpretive centers, research, science. I believe there's even lodging, which could be a hotel, conferencing, restaurants. So there's commercial uses that can go in. It's not limited solely to public uses. So we could have a lot of activities, a range of activities on the site. And of course, laboratories and offices is listed, but I believe it's Department of Fish and Wildlife is looking at a possible facility or even moving towards designing a facility at this point. So lots of interesting uses that could go on the site. Let me just close out and I'll turn it over to the committee or the group. What we're proposing is just really a name change, but within the general plan, have a description of this land use that only applies in this one location. Rio Vista Public Waterfront will be this site that we know as the Army base. What are the allowed uses? But more importantly, what are the strategies to get development going? What do we have to do step by step so that when the general plan's being worked on in 20 years, they're not looking at it saying, what are we going to do with this property? So I heard a lot of folks at the Park and Rec meeting saying we're frustrated. We're at this point, I almost want to give it back. We've waited so long. I'm so frustrated. We've got to do something. So we're getting that message loud and clear. So with that, thoughts about the waterfront property?
Well, it's very different than what we were led to believe, quite frankly. I mean, also, we were led to believe that there are two different parcels, meaning the area, I believe it was 12 acres that could be used only for recreation. And then the Army base area was going to be used for the fishery. At least that's how I understood it to be. And it looks like that entire property has commercial uses of lodging facilities, conference and meeting facilities, which is restaurants, boating, fishing. That seems much broader than what we originally.
That was the steering committee had decided to set aside the
That 12
recreational-
acres.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But still, I mean, this is the land use for the deed for the entire space. That's great. Thank you.
And then I think as Councilmember Dolk may be alluding, there's been some work since this time and there may have been commitments made. So I'm certainly not the expert on the decisions and the commitments that have been made on the property.
My only comment is the public waterfront. Sometimes I like things specific that we have a large waterfront. I don't know if we should put the word south in there or something like that to be a little more specific. Because we have a lot of different sections of what we're calling water.
I know Art had a great name that was about 7 words long and very descriptive.
Recreation and Event Center.
Recreation and Event Center. That the problem is once you put any words on, something is left out. So I'm hearing try to get something that's geographically more defined. So maybe South Public Waterfront, South Waterfront. How about just South Waterfront?
How about South, Central, and North? I
What
mean,
about
be
east and
past the
west?
bridge is the north.
So downtown is Central Waterfront.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
What is the approximate acreage of just that pink section there?
25.
25 acres?
It was in the previous
It's,
Is it that
I think it's 28 acres, the Army base.
28.
28.
28?
And I have to
express my frustration. We have been talking, I have heard the story of the state Fish and Wildlife for at least 4 years are developing their plans. But here we are, and as far as I know, nothing is moving. And either they've got to give us a date certain, in my mind, they got to give us a date certain when something is going to happen, or we move on to look for other opportunities. Because that is prime property.
Concur.
Speaking of the prime property, are there any easements on that property that would hold us back from doing any of this kind of stuff?
There's gas lines in one corner.
And how much property does that take up? Do we know?
Robin?
There's a PG&E easement that council recently approved. It's from the main gate. It's a triangle piece. So there's a existing fence that triangulates that off. And so that triangle pretty much has an easement for gas lines that we could put a parking lot on. And nothing else can be put on that. It's on the other side of where the boat launch is. And all the way down from the waterfront to the front gate. So that whole triangle.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're talking about giving a clearer identity. We're talking about an action plan to get something going. And that action plan may be that the city needs to aggressively look at opportunities beyond the state if they're not going to move forward with plans.
At the meet the candidates, there were questions about whether the city could sell the property, the Army-based property. One said yes, the other one said no, that it was somewhere in the quitclaim deed that we weren't able to do that as a city. Is that true, or what is the status of that? Robin?
It's true. The property cannot be sold. And it is to be used under a list of specific items that I think Paul alluded to. There was a long list of, they're basically community listed items, park and rec, all the way to community centers and like boutique hotel kind of things, a convention center, amphitheater.
So we could do $1 leases, or we could lease a property though. As
Correct.
long as it fits within this.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the research facility, there's some MOUs for them to access the property and to study it and do all of that, but there is no hard lease or designation that they will get the property.
Can I ask your honest opinion and maybe Paul's opinion as well?
That's a loaded question.
Hey, give me a loaded answer. What are the ramifications if we do something they don't want? I mean, I've had several people tell me government doesn't want that property back. So what if we came to them and said, we don't like these terms? I mean, what could possibly happen?
I think that's a Mona question. We need to ask the attorney. I don't know if there, at the old airport, there was some easements and some stuff out there that we were able to get rid of in order to convert that to a business park. But I don't believe that there's anything in the current deed and the deed restrictions that would allow us to do it for anything but those specific items. But yeah, that would be a Mona question and they would have to go back.
Yeah.
I believe in the last general plan, the sphere of influence included about 11,000 acres. Have you changed the sphere of influence?
No, I don't think the sphere of influence has changed in quite some time. That you may be thinking of the planning area as compared to the sphere of influence.
Well, the sphere of influence, clear out to Azevedo Road. Amy, and then back around there.
So let me get back to it.
That's
You
on
can see
on
the,
county- That's the county map recognizing Rio Vista with the sphere of influence. No, I see it on here. I
yeah,
have the map here.
the blue line is the current sphere of
So
influence.
how many acres in that now?
I don't know offhand.
But if you look back, you'll see where it was quite a bit larger. All the way to Montezuma Hill Road.
I know that in the previous general plan, they identified both a planning area and a sphere of influence, and we can make our planning area as big as we want. But you think maybe the sphere itself was larger?
Oh, yeah. Well,
Okay.
And according to the county general plan, when we were involved with that, largest sphere of influence of any city in Solomon County.
And it would seem that it was reduced at some point, and that's not unheard of when you have
Does the
overly.
City do that as a county?
The local agency formation commission, which is a separate body that says grace over those lines. So. I can get you the acreages of the current sphere of influence. Okay. All right. So that was the easy one. Okay. So downtown waterfront, now we're talking about central waterfront, what we know as the waterfront today. There is a good 16 acres of vacant land or underutilized land that looks like it has pretty significant potential for redevelopment. And as we talked earlier about infrastructure capacity, so if you can imagine 3- and 4-story buildings going in there, that's the kind of intensification. That's for company. The intensification that we really need land of that size. You can't build significant projects on half an acre. It's challenging. You can do interesting projects on half an acre, but something that really is significant and creates a sense of place takes this kind of land. So the 16 acres is very interesting. We are not proposing really any changes for this. We think that the downtown specific plan does a good job of describing what we'd like to see. I think that at some point we may want to look at the document and make sure, is it really describing how the development should occur? Is it maybe a little bit too prescriptive because it has something called a regulating plan that really gets down to exactly where the roads go, exactly how the buildings go. And so that may in itself inhibit development. So that's something that we can talk about, but that would really be beyond the scope of the general plan right now, unless the direction is, boy, this was a great plan 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but now it's not in touch with economics. So other than that, is there anything that the working group thinks we should be looking at for this central waterfront area?
I have a question just for my knowledge. Do you have a feel for what size hotel, as far as rooms go, that would need to pencil out to fit in? If there was a size of hotel that would pencil out to be in that area? I mean, if we're talking hotel, but nobody's going to come in and develop it because there's not enough space for rooms, and we might as well not be talking about it.
I could help. I just spoke to a developer the other day, and to pencil out, they need 2.5 acres, 120 rooms, 100 to 120 rooms. It is restrictive I shook my head when you talked about the downtown specific plan and what the restrictions are. I believe the building height is 35. He said they would need 50 feet. So things like that would have to be tweaked, but this guy owns a Hyatt, so he knows the numbers like the back of his hand, but roughly something like that. 120 rooms,
And you could get that on 2.5 acres.
2.5 acres with parking, outside parking.
So there you go. Easily accommodate a couple of those. And 100 hotel rooms, we just had an economic development discussion with local developers, and the thought was 100 hotel rooms would really be a shot in the arm for the local economy. So. All right, so really not anything we're anticipating doing much differently here, at least right now. We may revisit the downtown waterfront specific plan, but that would be about the only thing. So here we see the area, and then allow a sequence. So that is the area we identified as the downtown waterfront, and it includes that extends a little bit in the direction of the vacant lands. So good opportunity. Waterfront. certainly.
Can you go back to that? Why doesn't it include City Hall? Because this property's been talked about putting a hotel on for years and moving City Hall somewhere else. I think it should be included in that sphere as well.
I want to make sure we understand what this diagram is and what it isn't. It
Okay.
was just kind of an inventory of what we see as vacant lands, and this diagram is going to go away. You'll never see this boundary in the general plan. So we were just trying to put boxes around areas that we saw significant development potential. I've certainly heard from a number of parties that, why is City Hall here? This is prime real estate. Do we really need to have the city manager looking out over the river? So. But that of course is a significant move, because you have to create a new facility, an alternative location, and then this would likely have to be raised. And so it's a big play, and I'm sure it will happen at some point.
But you still have to, in the sphere that you have right now, you still have to do that because there is a motel and Rick's businesses in that sphere. So, I mean, we'd have to move those as well. So I don't know why we wouldn't include City Hall.
Again, we're beyond this evening. We're probably not going to spend a lot of time talking about an area shaped like that as the downtown waterfront. What we'll start to move towards is describing a waterfront that's divided into 3 segments and how they're going to work together. So the discussion is going to get more broad. The purpose of the opportunity sites was just to look at where we think there's some room for development. And I understand that, Dole Tractor may move, it may stay there. I don't think the car dealership is moving anytime soon. City Hall could move. All of those are things that could happen given the right developer interest and the right price and the ability to locate a business in a new location. Waterfront industrial is almost 100 acres. And this is an area that we discussed at some length. Of course, the waterfront industrial has the recently approved executive boat and RV storage project in it, which kind of raised a lot of attention, got our attention, said, is this really how we want to be using this land? What we heard from the working group was, let's think about splitting the land that's north of the bridge into waterfront oriented on the riverside and industrial oriented on St. Francis. So when we look at that, this is the line that we came up with. And it's a bit of an odd line, but that's because it follows parcel lines. And whenever possible, we'd like to have land use designations that follow parcel lines. And so what we found was, in this scenario, more than half of the land went over to the waterfront designation. But that seemed appropriate to avoid having, small slivers of land that are different designations than the body of the parcel. So we also are seeing the residential applied to the existing mobile home park, and then the vacant lands which next to it, which I understand is a floodway, and so probably not developed. The baseball diamond we see there. So thoughts about how we've laid this out. Is this getting to what the working group expected?
Is this one of the diagrams that you suggested is going away ultimately?
Well,
Because that
what's
gold area-
happening here, because these are actually land use designation
Okay.
changes.
So
And
that,
so these are what we're proposing. You won't see it with that particular dashed outline, but these are the land use designations we're proposing for what is now light industrial. It's all purple right now.
and then it will be, of course, red, which is downtown waterfront.
Yes.
The gold area, is that insignificant because we're talking about the dotted line area? Not important.
The dotted line was drawn around available lands. The baseball diamond or field is, of course, already developed, and the mobile home park is there, and then that extended rectangle is floodway, which isn't developable.
It's just a
So
little inaccurate because then the multifamily, that mobile home park doesn't extend all the way out to where it is. Right? I don't believe, because that's a floodplain over there.
the rectangle is the floodplain, I believe.
Right. And there's
Yes.
gold in it.
That may be the current general plan designation. So
question again, on the industrial general area on St. Francis side. Now, the downtown waterfront, I'm assuming we're looking at that making more restrictive as to what can go in there. But could that general industrial area be expanded down, if we designate it general industrial, and then we say, well, we've got a waterfront property, we've got something there that would fit going all the way back to St. Francis. Could we do that? Could that happen easily?
the city council can amend the general plan at any time. So the zoning, all of these designations are subject to the decisions of the elected officials. So yes, you can always, if you had a use that came in and said, I'd like to be here, but gosh, I want to extend all the way to St. Francis, absolutely. I think what we're trying to do there is respect the industrial land users as much as possible because their existing use is there. So.
That's a quick planning question. In respects to floodplain property, for planning purposes, is that just kind of a throwaway, or is there something we can plan for floodplain property like parks and things like that?
Absolutely, put open space uses in floodplains, very common. Even putting recreational uses in flood detention basins is fairly common. So what you generally can't do is put any structures. So
that's a good point, because then that gold area, the area it would stop on that one, but that rectangle could become green, which I assume is parks, right? Yeah.
yes,
And it would, because that flood goes all the way down to the river. So it cut across the downtown waterfront, or the, whatever we're calling it, north.
so my hearing a general consensus that we would like to see that flood corridor designated as some type of open space designation. Okay, great. Okay. Anything else about the north waterfront area? Okay. We're continuing north into an area that, well, let me explain what you're seeing here. There's a number of areas we're about to talk about. The industrial general down by the river, the area that you see on the map that says industrial general, and then that's all on the north side of Airport Road. The kind of brownish color is the city's 50 acre property. And that's what we think is going to be going to residential. And then there's industrial uses that are extending up towards the airport. So we just wanted you to get oriented because we're about to bounce around in these four areas and it gets a little bit confusing.
Are we discussing it now?
I'm gonna go one by one on these.
Oh, okay, sorry.
All right. So the existing study area, this is designated study area, which is a bit of an odd designation in the current general plan. It's not real clear what we were studying there. But that's what the use designation is. What we're proposing is that, and this is based really a lot in the direction from the working group, is the industrial uses that are to the north along the river. Dutra operates out of there. It's river dependent industrial. And, so we need to respect the some industrial uses do indeed need to be river proximate. But as we look at the kind of southern extent, those are residential uses. So we think just go ahead and designate the residential uses as such. And then we start to transition out to the west, up Airport Boulevard or Airport Road, and then we start to see the light industrial come in. I will tell you that I've had discussions with a property owner that's within what we're designating as neighborhood residential. And there's one of the properties that's directly adjacent to the purple. They have a building that was built for industrial purposes, and they're in a residential zone, and they've talked to me and said, hey, I'd like to do an industrial use. And I've had to say, well, you're in a residential district and you haven't had an industrial use for long enough that you don't have any industrial use rights. So this is one area where if the working group is amenable, we might want to pull that residential designation off of the very last parcel. I'm not sure.
On the western portion or on
Yeah.
the water facing?
It's on the western portion. It's almost like a square with a chunk taken out of the
Yeah.
corner. So that property, it has an industrial kind of structure on it already. It was purchased, it was cleaned up, and they're interested in using it for a non-residential use. So that would be one property that I would think we might consider letting go to light industrial use.
It's
Sounds,
already done.
Seems fine to me.
I think they
long as it's not on the
haven't
waterfront.
specifically requested, but I don't know that the property owners are aware of the general plan update process right now, and I think they'd be pleased. So we'll reach out and make contact. Okay. Any other thoughts about what we're doing with the currently designated study area?
Edwin's ready.
Yeah, my tongue was out. Yes, I thought, maybe I heard wrong. I thought this blue area that which is listed as industrial limited, that we were going to use that strip going up as housing.
We did not
that-
understand that to be the case.
That's what I
Was
thought,
that,
right?
was that the intention?
That was.
Okay. Nick, can you remind me, or are you aware of what land uses are there? I'm not sure if anybody is aware. I know that there are some uses out.
Storage facility, RV storage facility. It's got, Lyra's Welding is there. A number of industrial properties are right there, small industrial.
Okay, so immediately westward, so the residential parcels are in the light yellow color. Immediately westward from that are buildings I can see on the aerial. So we would be, if we go to residential, we would be creating non-conforming uses. There's it looks like probably 6 buildings. Is that storage that I'm looking at? Yeah. Okay. So I'm always a little bit cautious about designating properties that are developed to a use that they're inconsistent with how they're developed. So we can go in that direction, but I wouldn't do it lightly. So we're going residential.
Yeah, I mean, it's
I
always
made my
touchy.
pitch.
Yeah, no, it's always touchy. I mean, Gomes is sitting on airport over there and we're turning that into waterfront.
So Nick, did you understand that change? The industrial limited that we have in this area will become residential?
Yes, I'll make that change on the map. And then we're going to consider the property owner you spoke with, that property changing to industrial general.
Yes, that is what would happen. It wouldn't make sense to make it a single light industrial. So yes.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
just looking at the flood zone in that area. And it looks like that area is partly in the FEMA flood zone.
Yeah, this study area is constrained. There are 100-year floodplain and we have some concerns that there might be increased potential for flooding from sea level rise. So that will have to be considered. There There may ultimately be improvements either to River Road or associated with other levee work that would protect these lands from flooding, but it is certainly an issue. Moving on to the next one.
One more
Sure.
thing. In this industrial general, in 2016, I think former Mayor Richardson proposed maybe making that area a port. Is that something we can throw into the mix too? Because apparently there's advantages to having a port area.
So we'll look into it. I don't know what's involved with creating a port and what the advantages of that would be. Or what the commitments would be, so.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe we have a quick definition on when it's a non-conforming use, the businesses obviously aren't going to go away. They continue to use that property as they've used it, correct? And then it's only when if they're to try to sell the property. I mean, if somebody took over the business and was doing the same business, that would be non-conforming, but they wouldn't be kicked out.
The way that non-conforming works is you essentially have a use that was legal when you started and the zoning has changed and now you're no longer allowed. If you stop that use for 6 months or more, you lose that use right.
Mhm.
So it goes away. If you have a business that's non-conforming and you sell it to me, your business can go away as long as I open up my similar business within 6 months.
Okay.
The use can continue.
Good.
But
Thank
with
you.
that 6 months dark, when a business goes dark for 6 months, they lose that right. I've also been told, although I've been told both sides of this, that sometimes having a legal non-conforming status creates problems for getting loans. So and well, and commercial property loans aren't like homes. You don't have a 30-year fixed on commercial. They typically turn over every 5 years is my understanding, but I know there's probably folks in the room who know more than that.
And
So we will look at the potential for a port, what that would mean, what it would entail. And it sounds like there may have been some work that was done on this already.
I'm not sure. I remember he mentioned it and I know that he talked about advantages, but I don't know if it went any farther than that.
I think it opened it up for some big grant money as
Mhm.
well, is what I recall. And I think during the RUDAT process, they talked about that too.
Okay. And of course, we'd have to understand what the advantages of port in this location. Why does it make sense? So,
So they don't have to go to Stockton.
okay. All right. So moving on, the next one we're going to look at is a potential industrial area that's within our SOI. It's over 200 acres, 232 acres. The advantage of this is it would bring additional employment lands where employment uses could be developed, a significant increase. Would place light industrial uses along Airport Road, which is something we talked about at the last meeting. Is as much as possible, we would like Airport Road to have a relatively attractive appearance. We may be driving past houses on one side and we'd like to see more attractive employment uses rather than heavy industry. We wouldn't like to see construction yards and heavy equipment on Airport Road, for instance. So the considerations there are some wetlands resources out in this area. They may be the result of past mining operations. I'm still trying to understand exactly what this area that almost has a riparian look, what's going on, how did it get there, and what really is it? And part of this area is subject to flooding. So here's what we're looking at. And again, this is land that's already within the sphere of influence. And what we're proposing is that's about a 500-foot depth on that light industrial. So that would be adequate for many forms of development. And then the industrial general, which would be your heavier industrial, is towards the back of the property. So any thoughts on this property?
Again, I thought that industrial limited was residential all the way up to, I believe, the dump, if I recall correct. I defer to the group. but that's what I thought it was.
If that's your, so
That
we.
the idea when you drive down Airport Road, 20 years down the road, there'll be nice residential moving down that way, and then behind it would be the industrial use. That was my recollection.
We certainly understood that you were looking for a more attractive presentation, but if we misunderstood and you were thinking residential, then please let us know.
I do know for that first part, absolutely residential because it was closer to the waterfront, but then I thought that one committee member suggested that, and Donnelly suggested that we moving on up, and I thought, my recollection was it was up to the dump.
Well, this is why we bring maps in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no,
we want to make sure we get this right. So is it
Was that
the
correct?
direction from the working group to go with the residential? Then we probably need to also add in a buffer of light industrial, because having general industrial directly adjacent to housing is probably not appropriate. So I would suggest that light blue would move back, and then we would see residential directly along Airport Road for that same depth of about 500 feet, which is, that's an adequate depth to get a good housing development in. Is that making sense? Okay. Continuing to move along, so the recommendations here are, we understand we're going to change the designations to get the residential on Airport, push the light industrial back, and then heavy and general industrial behind. The last industrial site on that north side of Airport is extending up to the airport and includes the city's former dump and the Airport Road self-storage facility. There was some discussion in the last meeting about the implications of airport safety zones. There are airport safety zones that are on the most western portion of this, but they certainly allow development. I think the person occupancy is up to 40 persons per acre. So that's, for industrial, that's actually very high. So most industrial uses run on average closer to 6 to 10. So I think from the perspective of being able to develop, from the perspective of being able to develop there, the airport is certainly we can accommodate development in this area. So now here we see the land. I do want to point out we're proposing that the landfill itself be agricultural open space. And the expectation there is we'd be reserving it for some future public use, which likely would become park and recreation. If we wanted to, we could just go straight to park and recreation. But the thought is that either we're going to have to pull the dump, the trash out of the landfill. And Robin and I, as recently as Tuesday, were discussing the fact that that actually is a feasible alternative, and financially it could make a lot of sense for us to remove the trash from the landfill and then have essentially developable land again, which at first blush, I thought that was a very expensive undertaking, but there's some reasons that it actually makes sense financially.
What is the cost?
Do you have any idea on the cost to remove the?
And how much landfill has to be removed? I mean, how much is there?
It's a 20-acre site, and probably 5 acres is not landfill and the rest is landfill. The hill part is the landfill. It is residential trash, so literally it would just have to be hauled to another landfill. And that's something that the consultant's going to look at, that's working on our landfill later on when they get to that task, as to identifying how much it is to do so. We do have I think it's $1.7 million in reserve for the landfill in case the cap fails. There's a clay cap on top. And we would be looking at, if we remove the landfill, then we would be able to free up that cash. So, so they'll be looking at that. We don't know exactly, but I don't think it's, I don't think it's over $1 million to remove it all.
So can that 1.7 million that's in reserve for the clay, can that be used to remove all the landfill?
We have to keep it in reserve until the landfill is gone. However, we could do some interfund loans and some other kind of financing to remove this stuff and then free up that cash on the backside.
So you said it was 20 acres and 15 of it's filled.
Yeah, it appears to be about 15
And so what
acres.
is the other 5 acres? Is it just
It's
vacant?
just vacant. There's like a marshy little grove of trees and a bunch of weeds. That's all.
Okay, thanks.
The landfill's set a little bit back from Airport Road, so I think a lot of the 5 acres is up towards Airport Road. So the question remains, are we interested in just jumping straight to parks? Because that probably is a pretty interesting use if we are in fact going to have a various range of residential across Airport Road. Having a park in proximity would be a really nice amenity.
And it is identified as a park, a future park in the park master plan. I don't know if it matters or not, but
Probably tending towards just going straight to park.
I think
So I'm being naive. Is it the agricultural open space designation right now?
Yes.
Okay,
That
thank you.
is the designation. No, right now,
Which parcel is it?
it is the agricultural
Yeah.
open space parcel, yes.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure if you were asking what is the current designation in the general plan. If you look up towards the top of this light green, you'll see a long light blue. A long light blue rectangle with a chunk taken out at the very top. That's where you start to see some of the airport use limitations, but it's really up at the very top of this slide. The park doesn't have any airport use limitations on it. Looking at the airport, I hope I said that right.
The airport map shows it as part of the traffic pattern, but that's it.
Yeah, the traffic pattern has essentially no restrictions on it. Okay, so we will be changing the city landfill property to park and recreation, but we also do have moving up along Airport Road is currently designated light industrial. Is that consistent with the working group's expectations?
Is that all vacant land in this area we're talking about?
Yeah, I believe the only improved use out there is Airport Road self-storage, which is right next to the city landfill.
Actually, there's industrial
Oh, you're right.
at Church and Airport. There's several businesses.
Does Graham
that's
fit
right,
within
yeah.
limited or are they general?
Sorry. Yeah, there is
the program is close to church.
probably
It's right
general,
where your dot
probably
is.
general. Yeah,
And then we should also keep in mind that the wastewater treatment plant is out there. And we don't want to build unsuitable conditions around the land, around the wastewater plant, especially since we're going to be expanding it.
so the.
Right now, it says it's agricultural open space, which is perfect to be around that.
Graham Drilling and Service Company, I'm really feeling like that's probably a general industrial use. That's not a light industrial use. So
I guess I don't have any opinion on whether it goes to general, versus limited. Seems general is fine in that area to me.
okay, this is an increasingly traveled road. So Airport Road is that I thought that was part of the idea was to try to have more attractive uses as compared to less attractive on Airport Road.
I would,
Graham
like-
is an
I like-
existing use and will be, you know. continue.
I'm leaning towards limited industrial along airport that fronts where the airport fronts Airport Road. I would hate to see heavy industry block the view. I like the open area. When you're driving up Airport Road, when you look to your right to see the airport, I would hate to see a lot of big industry right along that road.
In that area.
So for now, limited industrial along Airport Road. Okay. That's fabulous because at this point, I
Paul,
think that I get.
real quick, that dark blue that's on the other side of Airport Road and that, by the legend, it's industrial warehouse. Is that true?
I believe that would be an existing land use.
Probably right. So, but it's all open land right now.
And partly because it is in the flight path, that's why it was of course excluded from Trilogy. It couldn't be
Yeah.
houses, so.
So if somebody wanted to buy that property, it's industrial warehouse, they couldn't put a grocery store there, for instance.
That's correct. It's industrial employment warehouse. That is the designation on it right now.
And industrial limited, is it the same thing?
It's somewhat different.
I mean,
Industrial
could you put
limited,
a grocery store on industrial limited?
No.
How about the property? We're probably getting to it, but outside of Liberty, the flight path, you probably couldn't put it there either.
no,
So
grocery,
we're kind
grocery
of-
not fairly high fairly high occupancy.
Right.
So,
So I guess that would be a concern moving forward, that now we're kind of not allowing any of the properties that are moving in the westerly direction to have access to, some basic services. I'm raising that as a concern.
Doesn't the for sale sign that's on the corner of that property say commercial property?
It does.
It does, right?
It does.
I'm sorry, a realtor is not representing the property.
Hey, they're always on that.
There is commercial that's at Church and Highway 12. I know that's, yeah, big chunk there. And then, of course, in the Sino Riverwalk property, there's also some commercial designated near that same location. So it's a little bit removed. It's down the road, down Church from Trilogy.
So Paul, this area that's next to Trilogy that can't be used because, well, it can be used, but it can't be used for houses. What's the height restriction on that, on building on that property then? It can't be very high if it's a flight plane.
Building height probably isn't your issue. These are, yeah, it's really the number of persons in the event of a crash, really, is what the concern is.
So
The
we can build a 12
the airplanes are very quickly more than 100 feet up in the air. And then you also look at the patterns of where they're flying. So in this being, it could be off of. Yeah.
So you don't want to put a 12-story building there, right?
Oh, no, I was thinking that it may be 35 to possibly
Okay.
50, but
Right.
Yeah,
I
that's
don't think
warehouse.
anything is allowed
Right.
higher than 50. So
50 feet. not
50
50
feet,
stories.
no 50 stories.
That's the B of A building. So I'll float an idea, because it seems like we're limiting the people that are living on the westerly side of our town. Is that the property, and I think this would address Darden's thoughts on wanting to have something more visual as you're approaching the airport. Is that maybe the westerly portion of the limited industrial space toward the back gate of Trilogy would become I don't know, commercial. It wouldn't be that entire light blue area, but,
Well, that goes into the thing of the supermarket.
right, so you could have that.
Well, doesn't sound like it.
No, but that's not in the flight path. The limited,
Right.
the industrial limited isn't in the flight path. Is it? You're saying the dark blue is in the flight path.
So we're talking the,
So where the triangle
Yeah.
that's at the point, that area, is that in the flight path? That is in the flight path.
Yep.
So there's,
Mhm.
okay. Okay,
You just wanna take
are you
control.
describing?
yeah, I
at-
do.
I'm
No, I
sorry.
want the people in Liberty to be able to do that. Or
Were
the new
you, were
development.
you identifying the property at essentially at Church and 12?
No,
Okay,
way at the top.
yeah, that is getting
Okay.
within the inner approach departure zone, which is one of the most restrictive areas.
Well, I'm just suggesting that somewhere on this, which it doesn't look like there's much land left, is that we're really limiting the people that live on the westerly side. And when we build out the Brand Ranch, it's going to be further, they're going to be further limited on access to, you know, some basic service stuff. And so, you know, this is a question to everyone, but it seems to me that's pretty limiting if they're not going to be able to have a quick place to go grab some milk or something.
Why not at the corner of Church and Airport? Church and Airport is outside of the more restrictive
Okay.
designations. The blue area you see up there,
Would it be in the dark blue area?
it would be across the street from Graham.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with that. That's what I thought it was in the first place, right? You said commercial,
Graham Grill.
where the commercial sign is.
The blue, no, the blue area.
Yeah, the dark blue
It
area.
says commercial.
There's a sign, triangular, yes.
Right.
Yeah, that would seem to be fine to me.
Edwin 7-Eleven.
And yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
I have a question on, as we're
Be
talking
higher.
about Airport Road, we talk about this quite a bit, how our city has a severe shortage of pathways and we have a connectivity problem. I mean, I see spots for green belts and pathways and things like that. Are we at a higher level right now, or do we need to consider some of that too when we're talking about road right now?
There's easements, right?
Yeah, we will be extending the very wide path down Airport Road. We will also be looking at other routes that might be a little bit more direct to get to downtown. And so I think that we can incorporate those in relatively narrow corridors. So I don't think it's really a use question yet. And what we'll do is designate those corridors in the general plan. So when land develops, it'll be understood that you need to give us 20 feet or whatever it is to have the corridor. So, but we will be mapping out those future routes, just that the land uses, I think, can accommodate. Okay, so what I've heard now is, in addition to what we're seeing there on the map, we want to talk about some commercial in the, what's currently industrial warehouse at Church and Airport Road. Got that right? Okay. Great.
What would the sale of that PSC ARB square, the other dark blue, what's the potential of the sale of that gonna do? Or what could it do? Yeah, it is for sale.
Yeah. Boy, I've had a lot of uses interested in that.
Mhm.
A
Industrial.
hydrogen generation facility.
Okay, so it
Thought,
would basically
maybe
stay in industrial more than likely, or?
It's actually, that's interesting. That property is zoned C3, and C3 is a strange designation. It's almost commercial, it's almost industrial, it kind of straddles the line. So what we see here is it has a general plan designation of industrial warehouse, but the zoning is C3, which allows either heavy commercial or light industrial. So there's a fair range of allowed uses. Unfortunately, what's been coming into us as the proposals that have been coming in have been really more industrial in character. So fabrication, raw materials, literally a hydrogen generation and transfer facility, which it's going to be surrounded on four sides by houses.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Does it make sense to change that designation now? Because it seems like if somebody's looking at that property, they're seeing what's going on there now and trying to fit something in there. As opposed to the fact that it's going to be surrounded by housing, residential and stuff. So does it make sense to change that designation?
This is the time when we take on those hard decisions. And they are hard decisions because we have property owners who are invested in uses and they have an expectation and they have buildings that are constructed for a certain type of use. So if we take that industrial use away, we are certainly taking away some of their economic investment. So
That could be your commercial area, possibly,
it could be.
right smack in the middle of all the houses.
They can ride their golf cart.
I think this is an instance where I would waiver just simply because their property is on sale right now. And that would create a pretty big problem, big mess,
It would.
because you suggest that we could change it at another point.
You could. This is the time for hard decisions.
Yeah.
So because the general plan is open now, so I think if it was undeveloped, it would be an easy answer. If there was no investment, if it hadn't been developed already, but there are buildings and facilities there that the owner is obviously hoping to receive return on.
I'll let somebody else take that.
So,
I already did my hard decision.
so what is the safety issue if that's put in to an area with houses all around it?
Well, each of the uses that have approached the city, we've made clear that you're going to be surrounded by residential and we expect you to be appropriate for those uses. I can't say I'm terribly excited about another personal storage use in Rio Vista, but that's a good neighbor. It's quiet, there's no impacts, it's low traffic. So that's a use that it may not be very exciting, but it's certainly compatible. Okay. So we've gotten some great direction on this site. Did we have anything more? Okay. I've got some great direction on this site and now we're going to move on to the 77 acre. We've always called it the 50-acre city property. It was never 50 acres. It was always bigger than that, but we've been calling it the 50-acre property for so long. That's what we know it by. Nick, are you going to go ahead and take over and lead us through the rest of these?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we talked about this site a bit in detail last time, where the purpose of designating this, well, we'll talk about that in a moment, but the vision for the site is really a mix of housing types and densities to have a broad mix of home buyers be able to purchase a home in Rio Vista. And given the designation it can provide amenities such as a neighborhood community park and community center is what we're looking at for the site to provide an amenity to the new residential units there. And we would like to see some circulation improvements from Harris to the business park happening, cutting through the site to allow pedestrians and bicycle movement to go through and to connect to those areas. There's a balance of uses that we're really considering. So it could be single family, very likely with some multifamily housing as a portion of the site, and possibly, again, a park site that would be incorporated into the neighborhood for public use. Next slide. So this varies a little bit from how we had shown it last time. I don't think it quite reflected the area that we are kind of showing how it does go down to the south too, because This is including the adjacent property directly to the south from the property owner that's interested in being a part of this and having residential on that property. So we're looking at ways to incorporate residential as well as park space, and then having perhaps a connection of the existing roadway there in that designated area to connect into one of the nearby roads and adjacent roadways. So we're going to be further exploring that connection, but this would allow, a significant new amount of infill residential development to occur. And again, from the grant that we had talked about before from HCD, we are going to be exploring this in more detail, looking at how this could, be designed and how it can look in the future. So we'll have more drawings and some more concept plans for this area moving forward that we can show you. So I think unless there's any questions here, our recommendations for the property is to reclassify most of the area from industrial limited to neighborhood service / mixed use, the NSMXD district. Again, we'll retain the existing industrial use there as industrial limited. That's a 5-acre site. And we'll be looking again at a focused planning effort for the land planning of that site within this update process of the general plan.
And Nick, I'm going to add just a little bit. The 5 acres is the Grima property. Grima does want to use 2 acres. He knows that. He would be interested in selling the other 3 acres. So it may be that we would be able to see that 3 acres become part of a bigger project, a bigger residential project, which would be positive. And then the neighborhood services mixed use designation is really an interesting one. It's pretty broad range of uses. So you'll see us applying that in other areas, but it is a use area that can be primarily residential in nature, but can accommodate other uses.
Paul, what does he want to use that 2 acres for?
Grima is constructing a warehouse essentially for his car collection.
Cars. Okay.
Yeah, it's his own, it's not a business, it's just storage of his own vehicles.
It's probably into the weeds, but on that one last drawing or map, wasn't there egress and ingress from that the Sino property onto Harris? Probably doesn't matter.
I'm not sure what.
Directly east of the industrial warehouse space on on Church and Harris.
Oh, because the
Sino
road
pro-
isn't connecting across to
Yeah, it's
Harris,
connecting
is
to-
that?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know if it matters, but I'm
Um,
just being picky. They were in the drawings, in their tentative map, they had a road connecting to Harris from the Sino property.
So the outline that you're seeing was the original city property, and I don't think that there's been any rights of way established, so that's why they're not showing up on the GIS at this point. But yes, there are roads that connect into those first lots that were recorded by Sino. Any thoughts? This is pretty straightforward. This is actually going to be fun because it is under city control, and we'll all get involved in the design and kind of visioning what we think it should be. So we're going to move on to industrial north of airport.
Yeah, so this area we're identifying as potentially industrial. We did not talk about this area, I don't believe, in the last meeting. Perhaps, Paul, you want to go to the next slide so we can show that what we're talking about here. So this is approximately 240 acres just north of the airport, and thinking it would make sense to have it as industrial limited, given the airport and the patterns of flights there, and would allow some employment generating uses to occur in the northern part of the city. in expanding into the SOI. This would actually be a new sphere of influence area that's not there today, that we're not identifying today on the map. It's something we're looking at potentially for new land that would be needed to be acquired or annexed. And these follow existing property lines. It is a little bit weird of a shape, and some of these property lines are a little odd, but generally the property boundaries of this area that we're showing here, the blue area, is following the existing property lines today in the area. Paul, can you go back to the previous slide?
Okay, so where do you want me, Nick?
Oh, okay, so yeah, I mean, basically we've said what we need to say. You know, we want to ensure
Okay.
uses are compatible with the airport. This is a good way to do that. So want to get your thoughts if you think this makes sense here in terms of annexing land, perhaps to go towards industrial limited and supplying some new employment uses in that area.
Some of this land certainly is encumbered by, restricted by overflight. There's portions of it that are in the internal and departure and turning areas, but there are additional areas that are less constrained. So there are certainly some limitations on how this land can be used. Probably we probably need to overlay that and look more closely, because while this did seem to make sense, there may be more restrictions from the airport land use compatibility zones than we had initially identified or realized.
Paul, how many acres is this?
232, is that what I heard, Nick?
Yeah, pretty close. 238, I believe, is the number of acres.
So back in the day, I'm gonna do a Lisa Heckman comment. Back in the day when overhead projectors were around, you could lay over something over these maps. And I think it'd be really helpful in the future for the entire group as you continue to refer to the airport flight path. It'd be really nice if we could see what the airport flight path is. So when we're looking at these things, you say, oh, wow, we can't do anything there. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, for these properties that are affected by
Right.
the airport. Yeah. So because this all exists within GIS, we can turn those layers on and off.
Okay.
So
Another question about floodplain. Looks like we're getting very close to the floodplain shift. Should that be part of our consideration?
well, if we look at property and we're seeing overflight and we're seeing floodplain, then, you know, we're starting to see enough items that probably we should reconsider whether this is good planning. We're throwing ideas out and you all are going to help us stay honest.
Should we move to the next slide?
I think this was one of those kind of bright ideas that wasn't deeply vetted. I think we can let this one go unless the working group feels otherwise. I think we have industrial lands that are less constrained and probably better positioned for development. So we were kind of looking at all opportunities, but it's, you know, and with fresh eyes, I really question whether this has a lot of potential given the constraints. That is not the sphere of influence. It's a blue line. This land is not in the city's sphere of influence at this time. No, not at all. No, not in the sphere, not in the city.
But would there still be a benefit for us to look at annexing it?
For what purpose?
Well, that's my question. Is there a purpose that would, for instance, would it deter somebody like a Flannery or some other property owner that would have another idea of something they want to do? Would it give us more influence over the property, I guess is what I'm trying to ask.
The way this plays out is likely if we went to annex, we would have to justify what urban uses we would be proposing. So I don't think it would be a matter if we could annex it to ensure protection of the airport. If we were interested in expansion of the airport, that could be a valid reason to seek annexation. If the city was going to acquire property and expand the airport, that would make sense.
So talking about expanding the airport, the triangle that is at the bottom side actually runs along the runway, and part of that is in the airport master plan. There's been discussions with the airport community. They wanted to have hangar houses out there. But right now in the airport master plan, it is additional hangar space.
And it's outside of
It's
the
outside the
city,
but it's in the airport master plan.
Yeah, thank you.
These maps show it being within the sphere.
Did I get
Blue-
that
the
wrong?
Blue line.
Mhm.
Not within the city, but it shows it within the sphere.
Yeah, are you referring to this map?
Yeah, this one. Yeah.
That is an unfortunate choice of colors. That is not the sphere. Okay, that is not in the sphere. We do have a couple of areas of the city, 3 areas that are where we have sphere outside of the city limits. That's not one of them. So
And kind of touching on what Art was saying, that, very little of that whole area is not in the floodplain.
and quite a bit is constrained by airport
Mhm.
overflight. That's why I think it's actually pretty easy to just leave this one off now and move on.
I do kind of like Rick's idea, though, about possibly annexing it to forego someone coming in and doing something in it, but it's pretty restricted, like you said. So,
You have to justify why it would be appropriate to add to the sphere of influence. So what would the uses be? Why would you be seeking to add it to the sphere of influence? And yeah, airport expansion would be an appropriate use. So
part of it is.
And I believe that property is, part of it's already owned by Flannery, and then part of it is owned by McCormick.
okay, Brand Ranch, Nick.
Okay, so Brand Ranch is an area of 311 acres. And this area, the way it's being proposed in the existing Brand Ranch development really meets the goals of the general plan today. So it is an approved project, and applicants could seek to amend the land plan if they wanted to. It does include a mix of uses there, mostly residential, but some portions of the property are restricted by floodplain and airport related restrictions, again, around, kind of limit the property. Perhaps, Paul, you can go to the next slide. We can see the area here that's shown by neighborhood residential. We don't have the site plan again here like we did, I believe, the last time, but if you can recall, it did show, mostly being neighborhood residential uses, single family homes, does have some park space. I believe there's a limited amount of, non-residential uses, such as some commercial, perhaps small grocery store, restaurants that could go on the property. I think around like between 5 to 8 acres is what's been identified in the current plan for the site. But most of it would be neighborhood, residential uses.
Nick, can you clarify how much commercial would be allowed within the neighborhood residential designation?
In terms of how many
Is there a percentage, or first of all, is neighborhood commercial allowed in neighborhood residential as a designation?
It is, yes, correct. And it would allow, I believe, up to like 10%. It's a very small amount that could be allowed for that.
That's the number that I thought as well, but 10% is more than was ever proposed and probably more than could ever be developed in Brand Ranch. So
Right.
the neighborhood residential designation would accommodate either the previously proposed Brand Ranch project or likely anything that might come forward with the owners of Brand Ranch if they wanted to develop it. So it's a designation that would very likely accommodate anything that would be proposed.
So wasn't there some talk of an elementary school possibly being out in that area? I thought that,
Yes,
Yes.
so
there
that would
is.
still fit in with the neighborhood residential.
schools are allowed in neighborhood residential.
Now,
They have tentative maps already, correct?
Yes, there is a tentative map, but candidly, they're never going to build that project. So they've already said it's a financially infeasible project that needs to be updated. So.
there is a space in Bram Ranch that is the overflight of the major runway. When you're taking off right over that property.
And by the time it gets to Brand Ranch, it's defined as the outer approach zone, which has limitations certainly, but it's not the most restrictive of land use designations.
Yeah, and if I can remember correctly, I think in the site plan, they do show park space kind of extending. I think probably in the area where we see neighborhood written on the plan. It's generally going in that direction, kind of an east-west direction.
I think for purposes of the general plan, the neighborhood residential is a good designation that will accommodate any of the likely proposals by the property owners. So unless there's, for some reason, that designation is missing something, I think it's a good designation. And the Brand Ranch project will play out on its own as the owners of the property develop plans and bring those into the city for consideration.
Is there a reason why you wouldn't want it to be that neighborhood services are mixed use? Or explain to me what the difference is. If you can have some commercial in neighborhood, it's just a bigger percent in the neighborhood services mixed use?
It is,
Yeah.
yeah, up to 50% in that district of non-residential uses. And that would accommodate a variety of housing types too. I think this would be a little bit more limited with neighborhood residential, if I can remember, but the other one would allow more density and could conflict with what the other uses are around it here, so.
So to your comment earlier, Edwin, would there be a reason to make part of that be then neighborhood services mixed use, almost extending that brown up into that? Given trying to get, you could catch Liberty Island Road then and come through for some service if you were out in Liberty, or to your earlier consideration on the north side.
I guess in this particular case, they already signed their development agreement, and so I think that'd be tough.
Fair, okay.
Yeah.
I want to, at the risk of spinning us here, I want to make sure everybody understands that the Brand Ranch project may come in for a redesign. When it comes in for a redesign, they come out from under their development agreement. So at that point, it's a new project. So there is the potential to reconsider if you have a different vision. I got to tell you a couple of things. As much as we'd like to see convenient retail next to all of our houses, that isn't actually a formula that works very well for retail. Retail tends to feed off of itself. It likes to be clustered. It likes to be high traffic. So there might be some potential for retail up here, but this would not be the place probably to put a new grocery store, because if you did, you would be pulling a lot of energy out of your downtown. So there's a lot of push and pull as we start talking about how we serve our retail needs. The development we see around here, Trilogy, Liberty, that is the model that the current owners are seeking to replicate, which is largely single-family residential with some public uses, possibly schools, possibly parks, and a little bit of commercial. So that is kind of the model that they're interested in. If the working group feels like that's not the right model for this property, then we should talk about it. If you think that that generally is what fits out there, then the neighborhood residential is a designation that accommodates that type of development we've seen so far.
Fine with residential.
Yeah, I'd be
Residential.
hesitant. Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I'm just hesitant just because they're already coming back and saying that they need to change their tentative maps because it's probably not going to pencil out the way they want it to pencil out,
They need more density. They
Yeah.
need more homes.
which
Yeah.
means that they wouldn't want more commercial.
No, I don't believe they have any interest in commercial.
Yeah.
So I think that we'll probably insist on some level of commercial because that was the original vision of the plan. But again, that will go through the planning commission and city council. All right,
And the area around it, it's all Flannery.
no, the area immediately north of Brand Ranch, that square is Flannery. I have not learned that more of that land has gone over to Flannery.
I
Thank-
thought you mentioned that earlier right now. That was it. Oh, across the street.
It's right
Okay,
there.
got it.
Oh, it
Got
is. Okay, so our Flannery map is out of date.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's gonna be a moving target, so, and also our maps lag a little bit because we get our information from the assessor and they don't record the day of sale, so. Our maps are always gonna be a little bit behind.
Side note, River Delta Unified School District on their property, you're saying they're going to be out of their development agreement. So, which is going to pose an issue, which is just a heads up to everyone. Because there are requirements on the school and some other services, correct? And if they fall out of that development agreement, then it's going to pose issues because the new California state law is that they don't have these restrictions, right?
I-
Something to that
I
effect.
believe I misspoke. Let me clarify.
Yeah,
They may well be able to retain the terms of the development agreement for a newly designed project. But what happens is the vesting of the specific uses is lost, but some of the terms of the DA could continue on. I know that we will be processing an extension of the DA next week at the planning commission, then coming forward to the city council,
Got
so.
it.
But whether the terms of the DA can be retained as they start to change the project is a question we'll have to work with Mona and her team.
Edwin, weren't they in negotiation with the school district?
they are, but if they fall out of that development agreement, then that new law jeopardizes everything.
Okay, we're now going to head outside of Brand Ranch to the land that surrounds it to the west and I can't keep my directions straight here.
To
I
the
would
west.
say to the west and north, but
Right.
is that right?
Yeah.
Yes, west and north. Nick?
Yeah, so the area that you just saw on the screen, we're going to zoom in a little bit more too to show the whole area, but it's approximately a little under 900 acres in size, and that's not including the Flannery properties or the Flannery property we were mentioning just north of Brand Ranch. And we were looking at that to provide some new residential development opportunities in the future. And that would be land that would need to be annexed. It's not it's not a sphere of influence area that you have now. It would need to be annexed, in the future and creating a new area for new development. Some considerations, like we mentioned, the Flannery owned properties adjacent to the city boundaries are changing and fluid. So, that will have to be taken into thought, but we don't know the landowner interests at this time for those properties in that area, but looking to expand opportunities for residential, perhaps even further than this general plan horizon of 2045, this could provide a great opportunity to expand residential opportunities in the city outside the current city limits. So if you want to go to the next slide.
So it's,
I think there is a square that is Flannery.
yes.
Yeah, that one just,
Okay.
Yeah, it's.
Got it. Right here.
yeah, so we didn't want to do a hole or anything. We want to just identify it as all neighborhood residential, you know, even though Flannery owns a property, we're just looking at the future of the city and how it could potentially expand. And thought this would be a good area to expand residential and wanted to get your thoughts and ideas.
So if Flannery were out of the equation, this would be a very logical direction for expansion of the city, kind of an extension of the Liberty Trilogy Brand Ranch. Of course, knowing that Flannery is out there makes the question of whether this expansion could ever occur, becomes very questionable. One thing about land that's not in the city yet, if property owners do not wish to annex into the city, they can stop the annexation. So when we start talking about bringing land into the city, the landowner interests really do matter quite a lot, because if the owners protest and object to the annexation, it will just stop. So
I have a question. If, say, for instance, this does get annexed, these acres that we have, and if we do a neighborhood residential, it goes back to infrastructure and the Northwest plant and the EDUs and all of that. I mean, do we have the capability to be able to handle that, or I mean, is that something we'd have to add on to the Northwest plant?
before we could ever consider this land in the sphere of influence, we would have to update a document that's called our Municipal Services Review. And it goes deeply into our available service capacity and how we would be able to serve the property. We would have to demonstrate that we could in fact serve it, or at least had plans to be able to serve it. And that would be just a requirement of even bringing it into the sphere of influence.
So out at the wastewater plant, it could be doubled in size at its current footprint without going on to the additional land that's out there. So there is expansion capability, but then the developer would then have to pay to expand it. But the land is all there. And then as water would go, they would be required to put in water tanks and more wells and improve all that infrastructure as well.
And build a new bridge.
Nowhere.
Question,
The bridge to nowhere.
question, Paul.
Yes, sir.
Does it make sense to start moving down that road now? I mean, if we don't move down that road now, as far as annexation or sphere of influence, then it seems like we're by 2045, that probably is not going to be an option.
I'm not sure why it's more of an option today than it is at 2045.
Okay.
The undertaking of expanding the sphere, planning for updating the municipal services review is, it's certainly achievable, but it's effort. And I think as we think about all the things we need to accomplish, is that where we want to put our effort? And I would question that as compared to, do we really want to double down and make sure something happens at the south waterfront? It would be both north and west of Grand Ranch and Liberty. The developed little lot area is Liberty, and then Brand Ranch is the kind of the square and two rectangles that's not developed. So yes, it would include an expansion on the Highway 12 frontage. Yes, that's what I've understood. There's certainly more information than I have.
Yeah, that parcel is 161 acres and it was sold. But it sold, FHA sold that originally. And in the deeds, 51 acres has to be federal wetlands, 5 acres for a homestead, the rest has to remain. Goes on forever or whatever, but those were the restrictions. We look, oh, we know. So,
Well, that's interesting because Flannery, according to your Flannery map, it shows that that property hasn't been sold, and maybe that's the reason why it hasn't been sold.
My Flannery map's out of date.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay, all right.
Okay. Flannery was picked. Was put.
Yeah, our Flannery map is about 3 months old, and literally in the way they move, there's a lot's changed. Asperson is gone, and I had heard that some of this land by Brand Ranch is gone, but we don't have documentation of that yet.
They don't have
Sure.
Well, is this another accidental show of the sphere on the map again?
Yes, it
'Cause it's
is.
got the
It's
blue.
just a use of the same color,
Okay.
unfortunately. Yeah. So, thoughts, should we bother having this expansion out here? Should, our thoughts have been this seems like a logical direction to go. Well, we've just had some information shared that beyond Flannery, there's other restrictions on the property that fronts to Highway 12. So
Can you and Nick do further research on this and double check to make sure Mr. Caddy's in the same line? Because if he is, then it almost doesn't make sense for us to even look at that.
we can do that. And we can also, it's hard to keep up with the acquisitions of Flannery, to be honest.
Well, I
but-
don't necessarily mean the acquisition, but I mean what the property was.
Okay,
designated.
yes, well, I have to follow up.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
great.
Well, I think what I'm hearing is we don't need to spend a lot of energy on this property now because it's probably not available now and it's probably not going to be available in 2045. So how much energy do we want to expend on
Well, it kind of goes
Well-
back to what were they thinking?
it?
So,
Well, I mean, I get the city's logic, but I just would say that if there's deed restrictions on the property, we might not be able to do anything anyway.
Right.
Nor Flannery.
Right.
Yeah.
So we can attempt to identify properties with deed restrictions and exclude those. That may leave a significant amount of this property available to some degree, just not deed restricted. It may be that most of this property will be owned by Flannery before we're finished with the general plan. We'll work with Mr. Caddy. We'll try to get a handle on the areas that are subject to deed restrictions.
thank you.
Okay, I think we've talked through this already. So we're on to the Sino Not on the River Riverwalk project. Nick?
Yeah, so this area is about a little over 200 acres in size. Speaking of infill development earlier in the evening, we think this would be a good site for infill with single family residential, providing opportunities for new housing close to downtown and provide some opportunities for park space, trail connections, and perhaps some open space as well. But the trail connections could help link the northern part of the city to downtown. This would be a really critical area to develop and to provide those connections and make the area feel more cohesive. Again, we do have natural gas facilities on the site that need to be considered. And we do have an approved specific plan, which does lock in the uses of the site today. So show the next slide. So
There was discussion as recently as Tuesday night about precisely what are the obligations of CNO to maintain this property, to protect their development agreement that vests the land uses. We will be investigating. The initial run through appeared that CNO had met the obligations required to protect and maintain the development agreement, which honestly, I would expect nothing less. These guys are pretty sharp developers, but we do want to verify that and make sure that in fact, this land is still locked in its current land uses and its current map. If not, then this would be an area where honestly, I don't know that we would change the overall uses that much, but we might be able to achieve some improvements, particularly for pedestrian and bicycle circulation. This is the piece that right now is separating the communities. And we really need to fill in this piece of the board.
I think
So,
I asked this last time, but what is CNO a developer?
yes,
And is it an acronym or is that the name?
no, it's, I believe it's a last name,
That's what it is.
SEENO.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's got the house on the hill up by the Concord Pavilion, up behind it,
Didn't
Okay.
they build Vineyard
the
Bluffs?
estate.
Rick?
No,
No.
that was Hoffman, but if you go to Brentwood, you'll see a lot of CNO signs. They're building over there.
Pittsburgh as well.
Yep. Okay, so our recommendations here are just we're going to have to wait and see whether there's any play with the entitlements. If in fact the DA is still in place, it protects the vesting tentative map, which gets down to the very precise alignment of streets and where the lots are. And so there's really no movement. If the DA has for some reason lapsed, or if they're not performing on their obligations, then we may have the potential to work with the developer and update the plan. And finally, maybe even though it's a vested map, the developer might have some interest in revisiting the plan because it's been approved for quite a while and may not reflect the economy of today. So. Del Rio Hills, this is Esperson. Nick?
Okay, so this is an area of approximately 500 acres. And obviously close location to downtown, so it brings some new residential development opportunities that could happen to provide a mix of housing use types and densities. Again, could provide some good open space opportunities, neighborhood parks, and trail connections. As we discussed before, natural gas extraction infrastructure is an issue there on the site in the property, so could be limiting to any future residential development. Next slide. It is identified today as in the general plan as neighborhood residential and residential estate. So there are two designations that are currently on the property for the general plan designations. So they kind of match what's around them. As you can tell, the Riverwalk is neighborhood residential, and then residential estate is for the subdivision just directly south of Del Rio Hills there, as you can see in that small subdivision of about, I think it's about 60 to 80 homes there. But we're wanting to make
So our options here are, just leave it as is. We could remove the designation. I don't know what the status of the Del Rio Hills project is. If this were any other developer, I would say we really need to find out if it's vested, if it's protected by a development agreement or something, and then be cautious about removing the designations. It may be that the path of least effort is simply leave it alone, but we're not expecting this property is going to develop regardless. Not just because of CNO, but as discussed earlier, because of the natural gas infrastructure impacts. So thoughts? What should we be doing here, folks?
If it doesn't look like there's going to be any movement, I say just leave it. I don't know whether we need to spend a lot of time on it. That's my opinion.
Okay, I would want to certainly consult with Mona before making any changes, because this is an approved specific plan area. And while we don't think that Flannery is going to have any expectation of developing, we still need to make sure we stay within our lane legally.
Yeah, I would say leave it. Is there a way we can address it in the general plan? There's like an asterisk that we for us is this is what we see now. I don't know. I'm just, as we were saying earlier, I just like to kind of explain what our mindset is, but
Yes, we can. And I got to tell you, in my career, this is a unique circumstance. I've never seen anything like a property owner coming in and buying up all the land without an expectation to develop. It's baffling. And I think that explaining this very unique circumstance at the outset is appropriate. It's really quite odd. Nobody knows.
And I agree with Dole in that there should be an asterisk. We were going over the housing element the other day, and there was a couple references to Del Rio Hills as well. And it just states it as if it's still going to happen. And I agree. I think we should have an asterisk next to it and define it in a
Yeah.
footnote.
Approved specific plan not anticipated to develop. Okay, great. Well, then we won't change any designations, but we'll have some context discussions about the property.
You're talking mainly just about the residential, the
It's
neighborhood residential part.
the neighborhood residential and the residential estate is all Esperson, now Flannery.
Oh, okay. But could that residential estate piece still be developed without the gas issues? Or is it the whole
No,
piece?
I think they just get worse as you go
Oh.
farther. Yeah, you look at that area
Maybe the piece
generally
down by the river.
extending out from Rio Vista, and it's just dotted with wells and roads, and yeah, it's been quite the day when they were pulling all that gas out of the ground.
Mhm.
All right, so the last one is, no, I'm sorry, not the last one. Nick?
Yeah, so this is a new opportunity site that we didn't share last time. This is an area we're identifying as neighborhood services mixed use partially in the sphere of influence that's there today. And we can point that out on the map on the next slide here in a moment, but this is an area of approximately 320 acres. And I think you had seen that before as at the bottom of the map when we were looking at Brand Ranch, but this is an area along Highway 12 that could provide some new residential opportunities as well as some commercial activity and perhaps office uses, could be medical service uses or some other things. But this would again be annexation of land in the sphere of influence. And there's some issues we'll have with Highway 12 and ingress and egress that we'll have to look at in a little more detail. But if you go to the next slide, this area does stretch along Highway 12 and just south of Brand Ranch there. Now, part of this area is already in the sphere of influence. So, generally where that dot is, neighborhood services mixed use, if you just imagine a line going parallel like perpendicular to Highway 12, really, right there and stretching. So about a third of the property is in your existing sphere of influence. And this would then be stretching into a new area, expanding your sphere of influence here along Highway 12. So this could provide, again, some residential opportunities as well as some commercial service uses like a grocery store or some other things. I believe we talked about this a little bit in the last meeting. We thought about identifying some opportunities for retail and perhaps medical office or something like that in this area. And this would be a way to achieve that. So I want to get your thoughts on this area.
And I think that there are also some natural gas some infrastructure in this area as well. So that would be a constraint. And I suspect that Mr. Caddy has personal knowledge of this property, if I'm not mistaken. The comment was, is that a Flannery property at this time? Not as of our last mapping, but of course, that's the very changing landscape.
How many acres is this property?
That's right.
N-
Sorry,
How many
they're all-
acres?
I think 250 to 300. Go back to the last slide. It shows it there. Or 300.
321.
Thank you.
This is a significant chunk of ground and it would make complete sense. Possibly but for Flannery and possibly but for the issues associated with the existing natural gas infrastructure. So a couple of challenges for sure.
Well, one of the things that I've been looking at in that area is a roadway. Because whatever we're calling our new our south waterfront or our west waterfront area, you're tied in through neighborhoods. You have to drive through neighborhoods to do anything. And if you're hauling a fifth wheel or a boat or whatever, or if you're just going out there for recreation, you're driving through a neighborhood right by a middle school. And there's no way around that. And I'm wondering what it would take to get some kind of a roadway that would go from Highway 12 through that area there, which is now just hillside, and get it, and so we can get our visitors down to that area without having them drive through a neighborhood.
Okay, so Azevedo goes that way. Well, you can go to Montezuma Hills on Azevedo.
Also, when we were talking about Del Rio Hills, this is a question for Mona, but in terms of egress and ingress from Highway 12, getting an easement across Del Rio Hills and coming down to Montezuma. Right, and that'd be a more direct route. I don't know the law around that. I know you have to have access to your property, but I don't know how they define that.
I think we're having some great conversations about road alignments and we'll pick those up in the circulation. Some of those missing pieces that would help the system around the city as well as the system in the city work better. Question here is, does this concept have legs or is there just too much stacked against it between the natural gas infrastructure and Flannery ownership?
Well, it's always going to be separated by Flannery property, right? It's going to be kind of its own island.
This,
Yeah.
well, it may be Flannery at this
Yeah.
time. So, but it would be directly across the street from Trilogy.
Although Flannery is not a four-letter word, it's becoming a four-letter word, starting with an F.
Yeah.
Just, yeah.
Are you suggesting we just stay with what you have up there, neighborhood services, mixed use, and move on?
We can, but that is a new proposed designation. And the question is, should we even take this swing? Or should we just acknowledge that it's not going to do anything?
Well, question, given we went over the vision statement, we want to provide services that are going to meet the needs of our citizens. So given how we've outlined the rest of our land use, is it necessary or is it not necessary? Meaning, do we need more land for mixed use in the city to provide full services when we become a 16,000 person city?
We're going to get to that in a couple slides. The short
There you
answer
go.
is no, we don't need it.
We do not need it.
We do not need it.
I just think we need to be tactical on where we're spreading our SOI, and I don't know how tactical this piece would be.
Okay,
What was the original, in the original general plan 2020? What was this identified as?
ag.
If the F people bought this, then we might as well just leave it as ag.
Yeah, I say F them.
Okay, we're gonna drop off the neighborhood services that is designated as site 13. We'll just let that one go.
Okay.
And then the final area that we want to talk about, and this should be fairly quick. Nick?
Yeah, so this is the sphere of influence area already designated for Rio Vista, that's south of downtown. It's an area of approximately 1,148 acres. We may be able to look at this to provide new residential opportunities in the future. There, isn't good circulation or access today necessarily, and it would involve existing gas wells as a constraint there. So we're not identifying for urban uses or residential uses at this time, but it is a potential area that you could expand into and want to get your thoughts for the future.
This is McCormick property, correct? I believe
Not
this
sure.
is McCormick.
Yeah, I'd
In
say
which-
mostly McCormick. maybe
Yeah,
some
in
neighborhoods.
which case, I believe they put all their property into a conservancy. So there's big restrictions on it.
Mhm.
So they separated the development rights from the land.
There's not going to be any development like there. You can't put a wind power or anything on that property. I think they're going to,
Interesting.
yeah. So you should just check that.
Okay, so our proposal is to add no urban designations out here. That seems appropriate, right? Right. I don't think we'll be annexing Sandy Beach Regional Park from the county is my guess, so. Sandy Beach? Oh. Interesting. So we're proposing no urban designations out here and that sounds appropriate. Okay. All right. So we have just gone through all of the study areas that we wanted to highlight to the working group to talk about. Thank you for the direction on that. Want to talk.
I'm sorry,
rel-
can I just ask one question before we move
Yes.
on? Well, I was just looking at the map with Rick on the Flannery properties. There's two in that area we just looked at that you said was on McCormick. There's two chunks that are Flannery that are in there, right? Not that one, the next, that one. Their Flannery property in that.
Maybe I'm wrong. That's what I had
There
heard
is
around
a,
10 years ago.
yeah, within the sphere of influence, there is a chunk that is in our sphere of influence. You can see it on this.
That's right.
Where's
Fine, when you're there,
Montezuma?
They would have. Okay, I got it.
Okay.
Okay, we ready to
Sorry.
go on?
Yeah.
Okay, we want to talk a little bit about anticipated growth. This gets to Edwin's question of do we have enough land? And so going to walk you through some preliminary numbers because we wanted to get a thumbnail of how are we doing as far as accommodating growth. Why do we do this? So first is we want to have some sense of how fast we've grown in the past and get some idea of how fast we might anticipate growing in the future. And that's both for residential and employment uses. That's really important to help us with preparing the CEQA environmental document. We have to make a projection of how much development we expect and what are we analyzing under the CEQA document. For the general plan EIR, we're going to be making a projection of how much development we anticipate to happen by 2045, and that's what we'll analyze. We're not analyzing development of every parcel in the city because we don't think that's realistic. We don't think it's going to happen. So we will build projections. They'll be somewhat generous so that we ensure that we have enough of an umbrella, if you will, so that our CEQA document will help us with all those future projects. But we have to have some basis for how big do we think we'll get. We'll also look at ultimate build out, which is to say all of the land in Rio Vista at some future state, maybe 50 years out. How much intensification do we expect? How much development on the lands that are available? And what does that Rio Vista look like? And that's really helpful for planning things like roads, parks, schools, and getting a sense that, okay, by 2045, we're going to be maybe 16,000 people, but eventually we'll probably inch up to 22,000, just pulling numbers out of the air. So what does a town of 22,000 need? What's kind of the circulation needs, the school needs, the park needs? It helps us make sure that when we land at that built out condition, we've been thinking about everything we need to achieve getting there. Does that all make sense? Okay. So let's start with population. At writing of the 2000 general plan, Rio Vista was 5,100 people. And as of today, our best estimate is we're 10,553. So a fair amount of growth and averaged over that 22-year period, that's a 3.4% annual growth. Well, what does that mean, 3.4%? I can tell you that a 2% growth rate is considered a reasonable growing kind of rate. Anything north of 2% starts to feel like you're growing fast. There's communities such as at one point Elk Grove, at one point Lincoln, that were probably growing close to 10% annually. They were growing very, very fast. And that brings certain growing pains. Your city is changing, your community is changing very fast. The 3.4% growth rate is it's interesting because I was driven a lot by Trilogy and by Liberty, of course, coming on. And Rio Vista was quite a bit smaller. And so these new homes came on, and percentage wise, we grew fairly rapidly. If we built the same number of homes every year, we wouldn't be at the same percentage growth rate. So as we looked at this, we really think that 2.5% annual growth averaged over the years is a reasonable, somewhat robust projection of how fast we'll grow. And that's driven by a few things. First of all, we do know that our land base is shrinking. We have Brand Ranch and we have Riverwalk. We know we have those projects. We have some additional infill areas, but beyond that, it starts to get hard to see exactly where we're going to grow. So that will slowly constrain the rate of development. So for our purposes, what staff at this point is recommending is we assume a 2.5% growth rate over the 22 years ahead of us to get to the horizon of the general plan. Make sense? So that means we'll have a population of about 18,600. If I were a betting man, I'd say it would be less than that. So we're trying to err a little bit on the side of being ambitious so that we don't undershoot. Then we want to know, well, how much land does it take to accommodate those almost 8,000 new residents? The first thing we have to do is talk about household size. How many people are going to live in a dwelling unit? These are not Rio Vista's numbers. Because if we look at Rio Vista's numbers, we get very skewed numbers because of the age-restricted Trilogy and Liberty. So we really can't look at our own numbers. The 3 persons per household for single family and 2.2 for multifamily are kind of industry accepted numbers. They're ballpark, but they're in the general range of what we would normally expect to see from single family and multifamily. And then we have to think about, well, how many people are going to live in single family versus apartments? And well, this town is predominantly single family, and we think that that's likely to continue based upon the approved projects. We have approved projects at Brand Ranch and Encino, and they're predominantly single family. We do know that we're going to need to bring on multifamily to meet our lower income housing obligations. And that's something the state is going to push us hard on. So we need to make sure that we have the ability to accommodate multifamily, but Bottom line is we're projecting about 2,400 single-family homes and about 370 multifamily units. So that's what we're trying to accommodate through 2045. And then the last bit of this is we have to say, okay, how much land does it take? And at the end of all this, what we came up with is we need about 400 acres of single family and about 20 acres of multifamily. That's what we reasonably expect is going to develop over the life of the general plan. Now, when we get back to looking at Sino and Brand Ranch, more than enough land. And that doesn't account for anything that's going to happen inside the city, any type of, we're seeing projects in town here that have 50 acres, 50 dwellings to the acre, because they're very small projects that have apartments, but they're just slipped in. And that's a form of development we're seeing commonly as communities try to meet the needs of their residents. So we can easily see how those 400 single family and 400 acres of single family and 20 acres of multifamily could be accommodated. So it was nice to test it out and to get to the conclusion that we're probably in good shape for the next 30 years or so of residential development. Unless, of course, Rio Vista catches on fire and the Sino project builds out in 5 or 6 or 7 years, which certainly could happen. But it looks like we have enough land inventory to accommodate our growth. And then when we start talking about the additional probably 100 or more acres, maybe 200 acres of residential we are going to be placing along Airport Road, that just gives us a buffer for the future. So that's the residential side. We did the same thing for employment. Back in 2000, we had almost 2,000 jobs in Rio Vista. And now 22 years later, we have about 450 more jobs. That's pretty anemic, folks. That's 1% growth rate, and it's not in keeping with the vision that we have understood, which is having jobs for the residents, for the families, for the people who live in Rio Vista, having services, having restaurants, stores. So all of that, we probably would like to see that growth happen much more quickly. But if we just project that 1% growth forward until 2045, we pick up a little more than 600 jobs. If we just nailed it, if we killed it and grew at 3% growth annually for employment, we'd pick up over almost 2,400 jobs. So that's kind of bookending between historic and what might be considered aspirational. Like, boy, that would be great if we could achieve it. And so the range is, somewhere around 630 to 2,400 jobs over the next 22 years. So what does that look like? First of all, who works in Rio Vista? And this is kind of interesting because we looked at where people were employed in 2000 and where they're employed in 2022. The service jobs is by far the biggest jump. And I can share with you what service is, but it's a range of different jobs in the 2022 numbers, but retail, pretty flat. We don't really have much more in the way of retail in 20 years. We're seeing more wholesale jobs. Agriculture and mining is holding pretty steady. There's a gap in the data because in 2000, these categories weren't broken out. But what you see is other jobs, 790, but a lot of those jobs of construction, transportation, government, and education. Education is a big employer, fit within the other category. So that's where people are working in the past and where they're working now. And we are seeing some transitions, but I think if we're really talking about job growth, we're going to be talking about certainly some in the service, retail, aspects, but also, we have a business park that's developing. And there's actually quite a few employees in the business park at this time and will be more. The business park's probably not even half built out at this point. And the uses that go in there aren't going to be warehousing. They're going to be people building something, maybe people growing something, different things, but they're going to be more employment intensive. So we're looking at, a growth of jobs over the next 22 years that through this whole, let me explain to you what you're seeing here. First of all, when we look at commercial, and now we're trying to figure out how much land we need to accommodate our employees. Generally, if you look over kind of a landscape area, 12 employees per acre for commercial is probably on the lower end, but conservative 6.5 employees per acre on industrial is actually what it tends to come out to be when all is said and done. We think that most of our employment growth is going to be commercial, retail, office. We think some of it is going to be in all of our kind of industrial, commercial, transportation. So those would be the uses you'd see on the industrial grounds. Maybe split 75% commercial, 25% industrial. And then, so how many acres would we need? At the lowest projections, the 1% growth rate, we only need about 36 acres of commercial and 24 acres of industrial. On those maps we were looking at, we were identifying hundreds of acres of industrial. At the aggressive 3% growth, we're still only looking at about 150 acres for commercial and about 100 acres for industrial. We can see that land on the map. As we start to look, let me go ahead and go here. As we start to look at this area, the expanded waterfront brings almost 100 acres. I think that's reduced now because we cut it back. We have room for intensification inside the city. So we have the business park. We have a number of areas where I can see the employment growth being accommodated, and the residential is just very easily accommodated.
Question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so we actually didn't touch on the business park, and it's zoned as industrial general. And it seems like most of the jobs are going to be in service. So suppose, I'm making this up, but a call center or a technology company wanted to come in and plop something on one of those properties, that wouldn't be conforming, would it?
It would.
It would be?
Yeah, actually, when you look at the business park zoning, it actually favors that type of use. So it's not just the general plan designation. The business park is more towards a higher employment model. That's the expectation.
I'm just confused because I thought commercial was more for that.
Or
But you're saying industrial general, you could put a tech company there, for instance, and it's
in the business
conforming.
park,
Yes.
yes,
Okay.
that would be a conforming use. We would welcome that type of a use into the business park.
Good.
Yeah. So that was a lot of data, but kind of at the end of the story is, we're talking about a 2.5% growth rate for population. That's robust, but not overly rapid. And we can fit that within the city easily. Our historic growth rate in employment is low. We'd like to see that come up, but still, my sense is we're in a good position to be able to accommodate even robust employment growth. So I don't think we'll have issues of running out of employment-oriented lands. And of course, if some sector is really strong, we can start talking about redesignating lands from industrial to commercial or whatever that looks like. So I think we're in a good position to be able to accommodate development that we can reasonably foresee. And then the expansion areas are really for development beyond the 2045. So when we start to look at those new sphere of influence areas, they're really beyond the horizon of this general plan and would give us growth potential out on that end. So I'm going to take a breath and see if there's any questions.
I have a question.
Sir,
I didn't see anything on salaries, how much money people are gonna make. You're talking a lot of service industry jobs, low paying jobs.
so you want high quality jobs?
Absolutely. My point is though,
High
that
paying.
if we're building single family homes in California today, people with service industry jobs are not gonna be able to afford to move into them. And so we need to look at higher paying, how do we attract higher paying jobs to the area to support, if we are going to continue to build single family homes for families. We have a lot of single family homes for seniors that have made their money and they're retired here. But if you're talking a family of 3 or 4 and both of them are working, can a 2-person family working afford one of those homes that we're going to build over the next 20 years? If they're in a service industry, if they're both in the service.
Well, service industry is very broad. I mean, I'm in service. Real
Yes.
estate agents are in service. So the sky's the limit, really. It's just how far you define service.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I-
but
I
think
mean, that's why it's broad.
I understand that, but I think more realistically, you're talking about your call center people are service industry jobs. They are not making anywhere close to, I'm sure, what you're making.
About define a technology company, that's service,
Yes, but
and that's high paying.
and not always.
Yeah, engineers are making a fortune.
Engineers are.
Well, it's service. I'm not trying to argue. I'm just
Right.
saying service. It's
So-
so broad.
It
For-
is a broad thing, but what I'm saying is, we're not talking about. I see we're talking building single family homes. We all know what a single family home is going to sell for over the next 20 years. We have a good idea. And we're talking about increase in employment. But we talk about where it comes from in service industry, in retail, the types of jobs that are not making enough money to support that. That's my concern.
It's absolutely a valid concern. The match between salaries and housing costs is a challenge, and almost always there's some level of mismatch. For purpose of the land use element, we wanted to look and make sure that the colors on the map could accommodate the uses that we're envisioning. And to that level, I'm feeling like a good confidence. We're also going to have an economic development element that's going to much more directly get to what you're speaking to of how are we going to grow? What's our economic advantages? Why is some business going to be successful in Rio Vista? How do we grow in a way that's going to sustain the community? So the economic development is going to get into a lot more of the specific types of growth and jobs that we're seeking and how we're going to position for those, as well as think about what's the infrastructure that's going to make us competitive for the types of jobs that we'd like to attract. That could be a big investment in internet capacity, because a lot of people work from their homes now. And so if we just think about the internet capacity of the community, if we're particularly strong and we've got a wonderful setting and a nice small town to raise kids in, all of a sudden you don't have to be retired to move to Rio Vista. You can come to live in Rio Vista and not have to worry about commuting to Vallejo or Walnut Creek or somewhere else. So all of that will be looked at in the economic development element much more than in land use. And we've got a good economic development consultant who's helping us with that right now. Other comments?
I have a general comment about the current general plan and this future general plan. If past behavior predicts future behavior in 2045, we'll still be a bedroom community, basically, and that's what we are, because most of the people that work in town, that live in town and have to work, leave. So unless we can turn that around with the commercial properties and the industrial properties and economic growth, 20 years from now, we're going to be probably sitting in the same boat. It's what it looks like, at least to me.
I think you will be a predominantly residential community. I don't think that's changing, but you may be a residential community that better meets the needs of your residents, that better provides services because you have a more robust retail, economic, employment success within the community. But I think you're going to be predominantly residential. Yeah.
I said a comment too, and this might be slightly controversial, but I'm glad looking at your population forecast of 18,000, I think, I agree with you. I think that might be a little on the high side, but looking at our prior general plan, I think we're supposed to be at 25,000 people right now.
Today.
And the first time I read that, it just seemed like an outrageous, just completely unrealistic expectation. And I think a lot of times when they read a general plan, when people read a general plan, that's one of the first things they look at. What's the city think they're going to project out to? And we need to be reasonable. And I think 18,000 might be a little high, but I think it's reasonable. But I just go back to the prior general plan, and that 25,000 number was just outrageous.
That was before the 2008. But
Right.
we were expecting homes in all these areas and a Safeway and all this other stuff and everything. They pulled it all.
I remember
course.
2003, 4, 5. Sky was the limit.
Mm-hmm.
It was a heady time, and it's gone. It's not coming back. Yeah. So other comments on projections? Any thoughts? We're sitting at about 8 o'clock, and we want to respect everybody's time. We have one more item if we're ready to move on.
We're already
Move on,
past my
hungry,
bedtime,
right?
so.
Me too. I still have to drive home.
Hungry.
Okay, Nick, why don't you lead us through the discussion of our January workshop? We've had this discussion before. We'll ask for a couple of points of guidance from you.
Right. So we're looking into some locations for the next community meetings. We're looking at holding them in mid to late January, and looking at possibly having a DH White again, and possibly Trilogy, because we have not had a meeting there, and we feel like we could get more residents attending if we do have it in Trilogy. So wanted to throw that idea out there of having it at DH White and possibly the Trilogy community space. And then before we get your responses, we are looking at days and times. We're looking at potentially a Thursday evening or Saturday morning. But if we do think we want to have 2 separate meetings, it would make sense for us as a team, consultant team, if we could, probably get those in one day, just for our resources, to have it on a Saturday morning. Probably about a 2.5 hour meeting. So like 9:30 to noon, and then potentially an afternoon meeting as well. We could meet from like 1:30 to 4. So I want to throw those ideas out there. If we think we need to have perhaps 2 meetings, then those would probably occur on a Saturday. And then the topics and elements of the general plan we'd be looking at with the community is looking at future land uses and activities, mobility and circulation, getting people's thoughts on those ideas for the future. And then likely another element, quite possibly parks and recreation, is what we're thinking now, to have that third element, and getting into discussions about future park space, future park needs and recreational needs in the community. So I wanted to get your thoughts tonight on some of these ideas for the meetings in January.
Oh, first is, what do you think? If we want to, we can conduct a couple of meetings. We'll have the opportunity to hit more people. But as your team, we're asking if we do that, we'd like to do it on a Saturday so we could get our whole team here, get mobilized, and do a couple of workshops. So that's the first question. If you want to, that would be how we would recommend doing it. If we're doing a single meeting, does it make sense to do it on on a weekday evening, on a weekend morning, what's the thought process? So you all know the community better than we do. I'm not sure that there's any particular leagues or sports or graduation ceremonies or whatever that we need to avoid, but we're going to count on you guys to keep us off of any days where the community is largely engaged.
Well, I think if you were doing it on Thursday, if you did it Thursday evening or Saturday morning, I think Thursday evening would offer residents who are out working outside the community time to come home and go to a meeting on a Thursday evening. That would be my recommendation if we were doing one, but I like the Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I think so too. How many people came to the ones that were in the evening?
All of them were very poorly attended.
All of
We're,
them.
we're
Well, I
going
think
to
it's
have
gonna be
to.
Poorly advertised.
Well,
But that's a
if I
different
might
topic.
have another recommendation too. You know, Pam's been doing her economic development outreach, and she was somewhat successful, more of a grassroots strategy where she was getting with local organizations and planning it through organizations rather than, I think, going out and advertising and doing that. And it seemed to be productive. I think she got some pretty good turnouts on some of those economic development meetings.
We've already let Pam know that she's going to be
Okay.
leading our campaign to get people.
Yeah, and I don't know.
I think that what Pam did is maybe more akin to what happened for the RUDAT, and
Yeah.
you were able to turn the group out. So it's not, we're not going to get it through ads. We're not going to get it through emails. It's going to have to be community members talking to community members and getting them in.
Should we then, you know, plan for January, but maybe reach out to some of those organizations first to see what place and time works for them, or does that, or? does that even make
Absolutely.
sense?
Right now, we're just looking for guidance of, do you like the two meetings on Saturday model? There was some sensitivity about trilogy, like, you know, I don't know. I'll just say what I heard was a little bit of sensitivity about, you know, we always cater to those folks and we want to have something in town, some sensitivity, I
Well, I think
sensed.
they use, I think that the facilities at Trilogy to get used for downtown functions, you know, the shot clinics that we had. People know where it is. There's lots of parking. Yeah, it's just convenient, I think, for a lot of people still, even though.
And residents could drive into the facility.
Yeah.
Yes,
So no problem. Okay.
What facility did you say?
Trilogy.
one of the facilities out there.
But didn't you say there a facility downtown?
DH White is a school.
No,
know.
downtown events.
Yeah, when we have events in Trilogy that are related to downtown, not just inside Trilogy events. So it wouldn't be odd for somebody to go to Trilogy for something that wasn't,
I see what you're
you
saying.
know, Trilogy.
Um,
centric.
Offering one at that end of town Trilogy, and people can come to that. And let's say we make that the morning meeting. Then you've got Liberty and you've got Trilogy residents are all right there, and core people, if they want to come to a morning meeting, they can come out to that one. And move it to DH White in the afternoon, or to the American Legion Hall in the afternoon. And that way, if people want an afternoon meeting, they can come to that meeting.
Okay. I'm hearing general consensus on, you do a couple of meetings, do one in Trilogy, one in town. We'll probably lean towards DH White because this meeting will have stations set up. There'll be 3 separate stations where people can go and learn about land use and go through a process, and go circulation and go through a process. So we're going to be daylighting probably 3 different elements of the general plan.
Yeah.
Okay?
And on Lisa mentioned it. I think we really have to focus in on how we're going to position this and really market it, because I think the way it's positioned now is pretty unsexy. And as a result, I don't think people are really,
Planning.
they're like, hey, yeah, I think you can sexy it up a little bit. I mean, when you talk about, hey, am I going to take my Saturday morning, take my kids over to a ballpark, or am I going to talk about land use? I know which one's going to win. So There should be a discussion about it, not
Let's
necessarily.
talk
this
about
group, but-
circulation and mobility.
Yeah.
Highlight that.
Well, that will get people's interest.
Yes, it will.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
And I'm, yeah.
Offer some food.
Wine will do it.
All right,
Wine.
so I think that there have been two successful models, the RUDAT and what Pam's done with economic development, where it was more a grassroots. People were getting their neighbors to come somehow.
And there's
So-
food. We had food.
Yeah.
We did.
Are you cooking?
Yeah, people just,
You should have it
it
at
was
your
like a
house.
potluck.
We brought cookies and we brought them all home with us. Okay. So I think, Nick, is there anything else you were looking for on this?
No.
That covers it, Paul. Thank you.
Heard that.
Okay, I think we got what we needed on this. So we're jumping into writing elements. We're going to be working on circulation and mobility with Fair and Peers. We're getting ready for the January workshop. Our next meeting is going to be December 1st. And sure, that wraps up staff's presentation.
Okay.
Unless anybody wants to hang out and talk planning. I know.
I'd like to thank everybody for all the time they've spent. McDonald's is open for breakfast, but it's drive-through only. And thank you, everybody. Meeting's adjourned.
All right.
I think we should have whoever did the food at your house, Sarah Donnelly, or that.